There's a moment near the end of almost every South Park episode where you hear it coming. You might not even realize you're waiting for it, but you are. The camera pulls back. The chaos settles just enough for clarity. And one of the kids, usually Kyle, sometimes Stan, looks directly at the camera with this expression that's barely holding back a smile. And he says something that sounds so earnest and so genuine that for a second, you forget this show is about talking poop and celebrity roasts and men having sex with inanimate objects. He says, "You know, I learned something today." And then he delivers a moral lesson that somehow, despite everything you just witnessed, actually makes sense. It's this perfect moment of sincerity breaking through the absurdity. And it works every single time. Even now, knowing it's coming, knowing exactly how it's structured, I still feel it land. I remember being maybe 12, maybe 13, sitting up late in the dark with my laptop, headphones on low so my parents wouldn't hear, volume just barely above mute, worried that any second someone would walk by and hear what I was watching, and I'd be in trouble. I had watched this show for years by that point. I was supposed to find it funny because it was shocking, because it was the kind of thing that made my parents nervous, because the teachers at school would have lost their minds if they knew I was watching it. It was forbidden. It was dangerous. It was the kind of thing that meant I was cool if I'd seen it and could quote it. And I loved that. I loved the transgression of it. I loved feeling like I understood something about the world that adults were pretending didn't exist. But somewhere around season 5 or 6, something shifted for me. I started realizing that Kyle's speeches weren't just punchlines. They weren't just the show pretending to have morals after 40 minutes of deliberately antagonizing every sensibility you had. They weren't just throwing in a vaguely positive message so they could say they had some kind of moral component. They were actually right. Like, genuinely correct, genuinely useful, genuinely the kind of thing I could think about the next day when I was in an argument with a friend or trying to figure out why I was frustrated with something I couldn't quite name. I remember this one time I was having a fight with my best friend over something stupid. I don't even remember what it was about now. Probably something that seemed earth-shatteringly important at the time. And I was so angry, so certain that I was right and they were wrong. We weren't talking. I was planning all the ways I could prove them wrong, all the things I'd say that would make them understand. And then I had this moment where I remembered a South Park episode I'd watched months before. I honestly can't even remember which one now. There's been too many, and it just clicked. The lesson. The argument underneath the absurdity. I wasn't right. They weren't right. We were both kind of right, and both kind of wrong. And what mattered was that we were friends. And whether the thing we were fighting about really mattered more than that. And we made up. Because of South Park. Because a crude cartoon had basically explained the thing I couldn't see about myself. That I was willing to lose a friendship over something neither of us would remember in a year. That I was more interested in being right than in being connected. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. And everything changed. And I think that's the thing most people miss about South Park. They see the crude humor. They see the shock value. They see the show deliberately trying to offend everyone and piss off every organization and break every taboo. And they write it off as just comedy noise. Just edgelords being edgy for the sake of being edgy. Just 4 guys saying fuck on television because they can. But if you actually pay attention, if you spend time with this show over years, the way some of us have, rewatching episodes we've seen 100 times and finding new layers in them, you start to realize something that sounds completely insane when you say it out loud. South Park might be one of the most important moral education tools of the last 30 years, and I can prove it. I know how that sounds. Ridiculous, right? Absurd. A show where they literally have a character whose defining trait is being evil, trying to teach us morality. I mean that seriously though. I'm not being hyperbolic. I know it sounds ridiculous to claim that a show featuring Kyle's douchebag father and children saying things that would get any other television program canceled is actually teaching us something fundamental about how to live. I get it. I would have thought it was insane too if you'd told me that back when I was 16, sneaking the show past my parents. But think about where we get our moral education. Think about where you learned what you know about right and wrong, about how to treat people, about what actually matters in the world. You got some of it from your parents maybe, if you were lucky. Some from school, though most schools aren't exactly known for producing thoughtful moral reflection. Some from books and movies, sure. Some from religion, if you grew up with it. Some from talking to people who seem to know things. But a lot of it, more than you probably realize, came from entertainment, from things you watched when you were supposed to be relaxing. From stories that didn't have a flashing sign saying, This is a moral lesson, now please learn it. You didn't learn from a lecture. You learned from watching characters and situations unfold in front of you. And over the course of 3 decades, South Park has been quietly embedding actual wisdom into the gaps between fart jokes and shots of mutilated celebrities. Sometimes the celebrities are real, sometimes they're imaginary. But the wisdom underneath never changes. The show started in 1997. That's 27 years ago if you're doing the math. Basically a generation. A lot of people who are adults now grew up with South Park. We watched it in high school when we should have been doing homework. We quoted it because it made us sound dangerous and smart. We found it funny because it was weird and mean and said things you weren't supposed to say. We snuck around watching it. We hid it from our parents. And that transgression made us feel mature. Like we were understanding something that the people in charge didn't want us to understand. Which, honestly, we kind of were. The show was deliberately made to be inappropriate. It was designed to offend, and parents and teachers and institutions were rightfully concerned about it. But here's the thing that I didn't understand back then. Sometimes you have to be offensive to tell the truth. Sometimes you have to make people uncomfortable to get them to think. And sometimes the thing the authorities don't want you to see is the thing that actually matters the most. The show understood that. It understood that if you're polite, if you're respectable, if you make sure nobody is ever offended or uncomfortable, then you can avoid telling hard truths. You can hide behind tone and civility. You can use politeness as an excuse not to think. And South Park said, we're not going to do that. We're going to say the things that need to be said, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it offends you, even if you think we're being crude or inappropriate or immoral, because underneath all of that, we're trying to tell you something true. But underneath all of that, underneath the crude animation and the deliberately offensive humor and the shock value that was actually shocking back then, there were these ideas, these actual, functional, applicable ideas about how people behave, about what matters, about the difference between real morality and performative morality, about corruption and hypocrisy and the ways institutions fail us. And that's the thing that's remarkable about it. The show didn't have to be offensive to make those points. It chose to be, because part of the whole thesis was that offense itself is this useful tool, that sometimes you have to make people uncomfortable to get them to think about something, that comfort and politeness are often just cover for avoiding hard truths, that the most dangerous people are often the ones who are nicest about getting what they want. And what gets me, the thing that I've been thinking about more and more as I've gotten older, is how accurate those ideas turned out to be. How prophetic, actually. The show made fun of things that turned out to be genuinely ridiculous. It warned about patterns that actually became real problems. It understood, in a way that was almost like watching someone see the future, how human beings actually work. Not how we're supposed to work. Not how the textbooks say we work. Not how the institutions that claim to care about us say we work. But actually, in the messy, complicated way that nobody teaches you about, but you figure out yourself if you pay attention and don't mind being uncomfortable. The show was right, again and again, so many times, about things nobody wanted to talk about, and that kept being true over and over. Think about what it must have been like in 1998 to make a joke about corporate logic that made no sense and have it become cultural shorthand for any business decision that's clearly bullshit. Think about what it was like in 2002 to make an episode about tolerance being used as a weapon of political correctness, and have that become more and more accurate as the decades went on. Think about what it was like to watch Randy Marsh's addiction arc and see it play out in real time in your own life and in the lives of people around you. The show wasn't predicting the future. It was describing how human nature and human institutions actually work. And because of that, what it said about the past still applies to the present and will apply to the future, because we're not that different. We don't learn that fast. The same patterns repeat. I want to walk you through some of these. I want to show you the moments in South Park that actually changed how I think about things. That changed how I live. That changed who I am. That made me a different person than I would have been if I'd just gotten my moral education from somewhere more respectable and less crude. From textbooks. From parents who pretended the world was simpler than it is. From institutions that lied to us about how things work. And I think when you see them laid out like this, when you look at the actual lessons and the way the show illustrated them, when you understand how these ideas are woven into the episodes, you're going to understand why I'm confident saying this. This show mattered. It mattered more than a lot of things we treat as important. It mattered more than most movies, more than most books, more than most experiences, because it was there, consistently, every week, teaching us something true about how the world actually works. Not how institutions wanted us to think it works. Not how it was supposed to work in theory, but how it actually works. In practice. In real life. In the messy, complicated, unfair way that reality actually is. And if you've been falling asleep to South Park clips for years, like a lot of people do, there's a reason that appeals to you. There's a reason that voice, Kyle's voice, delivering those perfectly calibrated moral summaries, feels like something you needed to hear. It's not just the familiar sound, or the comfort of rewatching something you know. It's that the show is actually saying something true. It's actually addressing the real world you live in. It's not pretending things are simpler than they are. It's not offering false comfort. It's not telling you what you want to hear. It's saying, here's how this actually works. Here's how people actually behave. Here's what you actually need to understand to navigate this world without losing your mind or your integrity. And then it proves it over and over by showing you situations where these principles play out and the characters learn from them. By showing you that these truths are universal, that they apply in every context, that they explain why things happen the way they happen. And when you understand why things happen the way they happen, you're no longer just reacting. You're actually thinking. You're actually able to make better choices. So let me start with something basic. Something the show came back to again and again across the seasons. Something fundamental. Something that, once you understand it, changes how you make basically every decision in your life. The idea that you can't please everyone, so you need to stop trying. That you can't engineer a world where everyone is happy. That some conflict is inevitable. That disappointment is necessary. That's not a revolutionary thought in 2026, I know. We've all read the self-help books. We've all seen the Instagram posts about not being for everyone. We've all had someone tell us, usually in that slightly frustrating way where they're clearly trying to help, that you can't make everyone happy. But South Park understood this not as an abstract psychological concept, not as something nice to think about, to feel better about yourself. They understood it as a structural problem, as a thing that sits at the center of how society actually works, at the core of how every system works. And they drilled it into every possible context, every episode, every scenario, making sure the message stuck. There's an episode from 2004, Season 8, Episode 8. It aired on October 27th, called Douche and Turd. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, let me set it up. There's a student body election coming up, and the two candidates are literal representations of the two big political parties. One is a giant douchebag, an actual douchebag, animated, sentient, running for student president. And the other is a turd sandwich, an actual turd sandwich. And the show sets the children up with this impossible choice. Neither candidate is good. Both are ridiculous. Both represent something terrible. But the system requires that they vote for one of them. So the question the episode is exploring over and over is, what do you do when both your options are genuinely bad? What kills me about this episode is that it's funny in the moment. The visuals are gross and absurd and exactly the kind of thing that made South Park shocking in 2004. But underneath that humor, underneath the crude joke of electing a literal douche and a literal turd, it's actually addressing something real and serious and true. It's addressing the fact that in a two-party system, there's no mechanism for voting for neither. There's no way to register that you think both options are unacceptable. You're forced to choose. And the show doesn't spend the episode trying to convince you that one of the terrible options is secretly good. It doesn't do what a lot of media does, which is use humor to make you feel better about a bad choice. Instead, it sits with the discomfort of it. The kids are miserable. Stan tries to avoid voting. Kyle wants to register a protest. And in the end, they have to make the choice anyway. They have to pick the douche or the turd because that's how the system works. And that lesson, that sometimes you're going to be faced with choices where all the options are bad, and you still have to choose. And pretending that your chosen option is actually good when it isn't, is a form of self-deception. That's something a lot of people learn eventually, but most people learn it through painful experience. South Park taught it to us while we were laughing at animated feces. I've thought about that episode so many times in so many different contexts. Not just in elections, though obviously that's where it applies most directly. But in jobs, you take a job you don't love because you need to pay rent, and the show gets that. It understands that real life isn't about waiting for the perfect opportunity. It's about making the best choice you can with the limited options you have. I've watched friends spend years miserable in relationships because they were waiting for the person who would make them feel everything. And South Park would say, that person doesn't exist. You're going to find someone who's good in some ways and frustrating in others. And you make a choice. You choose them or you don't. But you don't get to have the perfect option that satisfies every single one of your needs. Life doesn't work that way. I've seen it in politics, where people refuse to vote because neither candidate is perfect. I've seen it in careers, where people stay unemployed, waiting for a job that will fulfill them completely. I've seen it in friendships, where people cut off people they care about because those people disagree with them about something. And every time I see it, I think about the douche and the turd. And I think, you have to choose. You don't have to be happy about your choice. You don't have to pretend it's perfect, but you do have to make it. And then you do the best you can with what you've chosen. Because the alternative, waiting for the perfect option, is just another kind of paralysis. The broader lesson there, the thing underneath the specific episode about student elections, is that you can't engineer a world where everyone is happy with the outcome. You can't create a system where every person gets what they want. And the moment you accept that, really accept it, not just intellectually, but emotionally, something shifts. You stop looking for the perfect choice. You stop imagining that some outside force is going to arrange things so that you get exactly what you want without anyone being upset. You start making actual decisions based on what's real. And that's a lot more useful than waiting for a perfect option that will never arrive. It's a lot more honest, too. It's a lot more respectful to the people around you because you're not constantly resenting them for failing to be perfect. You've accepted that they're human. You've accepted that you're human, and you're working with that reality instead of fighting against it. Think about how much of modern discourse is spent on the idea that someone should be able to give us everything we need. That if your partner doesn't make you laugh and stimulate you and provide financial security and support your emotional needs and challenge you intellectually and remember to listen to you and be there for you and give you space and introduce you to new things and make you feel safe and make you feel excited, then they're not the right person. That if a job doesn't fulfill you and pay you enough and give you status and allow for work-life balance and let you be yourself and provide growth opportunities and have great colleagues, then it's not the job for you. The show doesn't buy that. It doesn't buy the idea that there's some perfect option waiting for you. It says, you're going to have to make compromises. You're going to have to sacrifice some things to have other things. You're going to choose what matters most to you and accept that you can't have everything. And if you can't accept that, if you're going to keep looking for the impossible option where there are no trade-offs, then you're going to spend your entire life miserable and alone and angry, waiting for the douche and the turd to merge into one perfect candidate, which, spoiler, never happens. There are no perfect options. There are only choices. And the ability to make a choice and live with the trade-offs that come with it is basically the definition of being an adult. Which brings me to the next lesson, and this one is more subtle. This one took me years to really understand, even though I've watched the episode multiple times. And it's the thing that makes South Park so different from almost every other piece of media that tries to teach you about morality. The difference between tolerance and approval. The difference between accepting that something exists and accepting that something is good. There's an episode from 2002, Season 6, Episode 14, aired November 20th, called The Death Camp of Tolerance. And God, what a title. And what a mess of an episode. It's chaotic and purposely offensive and honestly hard to watch in some parts. But if you can get through it, if you can sit with the discomfort, it's teaching you something important about the difference between two words that everyone uses interchangeably: tolerance and approval. In the episode, Mr. Garrison comes back to South Park. He's gay, and when he arrives to teach the 4th grade class, he's also extremely inappropriate. He brings his lover, Mr. Slave, into the classroom. They do shocking things. They terrify the children, and the kids complain to their parents. But here's the thing. The parents interpret the kids' complaints as intolerance. The kids aren't saying, Mr. Garrison is inappropriate for a classroom. The parents hear that as, we don't accept gay people. And suddenly the kids are sent to a museum of tolerance, where they're lectured by museum staff about the importance of tolerance. And the lesson the museum staff delivers is basically that you have to accept and approve of everything everyone does, or else you're a bigot. This is where it gets dark, because the point the episode is making, and this is the point that South Park has made over and over again in different forms, is that this kind of thinking is insane. That tolerance doesn't mean approval. That you can believe someone has the right to exist and do their thing, and you can still think their behavior is inappropriate in a given context. You can tolerate something without endorsing it. You can respect someone's right to do something while thinking that the thing they're doing is wrong. And the moment you blur that distinction, the moment you act as if tolerance means total acceptance and approval of every choice, you create a world where you can't have actual moral conversation. You can't say anything critical without being accused of intolerance. You can't express a genuine disagreement without being treated like a bigot. What's brilliant about the episode, what I didn't fully appreciate until I was older, is that it's not actually defending Mr. Garrison's behavior. It's not saying, you should think it's fine for your teacher to act like this in front of children. It's not saying, if you have any criticism of this behavior, you're a bigot. It's saying that tolerating his right to be himself, or even his right to make bad choices, isn't the same as endorsing the choices he's making. The show has always understood that you can respect someone's humanity while still finding their actions inappropriate or wrong. You can accept that someone is gay and also think that they shouldn't be doing whatever specific thing they're doing in a specific context. Those things don't contradict each other. One is about basic human dignity. The other is about appropriate behavior in specific situations. And conflating them is a way to shut down thinking, not a way to promote it. The reason I bring this up is because I think about that episode all the time, especially in the last decade, where everything has become so polarized that saying you disagree with something is treated as equivalent to saying it shouldn't exist. South Park understood, even back in 2002, that this was a dead end, that a functioning society required the ability to tolerate things you didn't necessarily think were good, and that conflating those two things, tolerance and approval, was a way to shut down conversation and make genuine moral thinking impossible. It was a way to make every disagreement personal, to make every critique of a choice feel like a critique of a person's fundamental identity, which is a lesson I carry with me constantly. Whenever I feel myself getting angry at someone for disagreeing with me, I think about Mr. Garrison and Mr. Slave in that classroom, and I remember that tolerating someone's right to an opinion isn't the same as thinking they're right. And that clarity, that distinction between those two things, is actually important. It's not a small thing. It's foundational. It's the difference between a society where you can have conversation and a society where you're just yelling at each other, trying to determine who's allowed to exist based on whether they agree with you about everything. I think we've actually lived through what happens when that distinction collapses. We've seen it unfold in real time. Disagreement gets read as intolerance. Criticism gets read as persecution. Every difference of opinion becomes a battle about whether someone deserves to exist as a human being. It's chaos. It's exhausting. And it makes it impossible for anyone to actually think. Because if every disagreement is a life or death moral stakes situation, then you can't afford to change your mind. You can't afford to hear the other person out. You can't afford to be curious about why they think what they think. Because if you engage with their ideas at all, if you give them any oxygen, then you're tolerating intolerance. You're the bad guy. You're complicit. And South Park understood in 2002, way before we really started grappling with this, that this was a dead end. That confusing tolerance with approval was a way to make the world worse, not better. That you could have a functioning society where people tolerated each other's right to exist and have different opinions without having to pretend those opinions were all equally good. That you could say, I think you're wrong, and I'm going to argue against your position, without that being the same as saying you shouldn't exist. And that distinction mattered. It mattered then. It matters more now. The hard part, though, and this is where the episode gets really uncomfortable, is that making that distinction requires something from you. It requires you to tolerate things you genuinely think are wrong or bad. It requires you to sit with disagreement without trying to destroy the person disagreeing with you. It requires moral sophistication. And moral sophistication isn't fun. It doesn't feel good. It feels like you're being weak, like you're not standing up for what you believe. But that's not true. You can stand up for what you believe very fiercely and still tolerate other people's right to be wrong. The two things aren't contradictory, they're just different. And learning to tell them apart is one of the most important skills you can develop if you want to actually live in the world with other people. Okay, so we've got two lessons so far. One about accepting that you can't have perfect outcomes. One about distinguishing between tolerance and approval. The third one is more straightforward, but maybe more important in practical terms. It's the lesson about what corporations actually are and what they actually care about. And the show taught this lesson through a simple image. Tiny gnomes stealing underpants. The episode is called Gnomes. It's from Season 2, Episode 17. It aired on December 16th, 1998. It's early South Park, so the animation is rougher and the joke setup is more basic, but the core idea is perfect. The kids encounter these small gnomes who are systematically stealing underpants from the town. When the kids ask them what they're doing, the gnomes explain their business plan. And the plan is so beautifully stupid that it's stuck in cultural memory for nearly 30 years. Phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, question mark. Phase 3, profit. And that's it. There is no Phase 2. The gnomes have no idea how they're going to turn a pile of underpants into profit. They just know that somehow, magically, profit will follow from the collection of this random item. They've created a business model out of pure wishful thinking. And the way South Park presents this is as obvious parody of corporate logic. But here's what's interesting. The gnomes aren't actually wrong that much. They're exaggerating, sure, but the fundamental idea they're expressing, that you can put some effort in, Phase 1, skip the actual logical part, Phase 2, and expect success, Phase 3, is how a lot of actual business works. It's how a lot of startups work. It's how a lot of corporate expansion works. The plan is collect assets, or cut costs, or eliminate competition, or consolidate market share. Phase 2, the part where that actually creates value or makes sense, is just kind of assumed. And then Phase 3, somehow, profit. Think about how many times you've heard about business decisions that don't quite make sense. A tech company buys another company for a price that seems insane. A corporation announces a massive restructuring without explaining how it's supposed to improve anything. Politicians talk about a policy that will somehow magically solve a problem without ever explaining the mechanism. And when you ask, wait, how is this supposed to actually work? You get these blank stares. You get corporate jargon. You get told that you just don't understand business. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes I'm the one missing something. But sometimes, a lot of times, it's because there is no something to miss. There's just Phase 1 and Phase 3. And anybody who looks too closely gets dismissed as not understanding vision. I remember when companies started talking about AI integration as a business strategy without explaining what that actually meant. I thought of the gnomes immediately. Phase 1, we are going to integrate artificial intelligence. Phase 2, somehow this makes profit. Phase 3, profit. And it's funny because it's so obvious when you see it that clearly. And it's not funny at all when you realize that billions of dollars have been invested based on exactly that logic. That real decisions affecting real people were being made based on a business plan that would be rejected by anyone with two brain cells to rub together if it was being proposed by someone without a fancy suit. What I learned from this episode is the habit of asking, okay, but what's Phase 2? When a company announces a move that seems weird or doesn't make logical sense, I ask it. When a politician proposes a policy with no clear mechanism for how it's supposed to work, I ask it. When someone's business model seems to rely on magic, I ask it. And the answer is often that there is no Phase 2. It's just Phase 1 and Phase 3. And the person proposing it is hoping nobody asks too many questions. And sometimes they're betting on the fact that asking too many questions will get you dismissed as someone who just doesn't understand innovation or courage or whatever the buzzword is that month. And I think that's useful. I think that's genuinely useful in a way that a TED Talk about critical thinking probably isn't, because it gives you a specific image to hold in your mind. Whenever you encounter someone's plan, or someone's business, or someone's model of how the world works, you can just think of those tiny gnomes and their blank-eyed certainty that profit will somehow follow. And you can ask the obvious question they never asked. What's Phase 2? Most of the time, the answer will tell you everything you need to know about whether this person is actually thinking or just hoping. What's wild is that this episode came out in 1998. We've had nearly 30 years of people, companies, and organizations running on a Phase 1/Phase 3 model. And every single time, the gnomes are still there, still confused about Phase 2, still somehow confident that profit will eventually appear. I've watched this play out in real time. I've watched companies make decisions that make no sense unless Phase 2 is pray really hard. I've watched governments propose solutions to problems without explaining any actual mechanism for how the solution is supposed to work. And every single time, I think of those gnomes, and I ask the question, and I get blank stares. The other thing about this lesson is that it teaches you how to listen to people. Because once you know to ask about Phase 2, you start to notice patterns in how people talk about things. If someone is confident and clear, they can explain Phase 2. They might be wrong, but at least they've thought about how the thing is supposed to work. If someone gets vague and uses a lot of jargon and seems irritated that you're asking, there probably is no Phase 2. They're betting on momentum and hope. They're betting that you're going to get tired of asking or start to feel stupid for not understanding what visionary leadership means, or whatever. And the moment you understand that, you get a lot more skeptical. You stop taking people's confidence as a sign that they know what they're talking about. You remember that the gnomes were extremely confident too. Which brings us to the last lesson I want to focus on for this first section. And this one is different because it's not about a single episode. It's about a character arc. It's about Randy Marsh. And it's about addiction, agency, and the difference between understanding something and actually changing it. Randy is complicated. He's the comic relief father. He's the joke character. He's the one who shows up in an episode to say something stupid, or do something ridiculous, or stumble into some disaster through pure incompetence. That's his function in the show. He's there to be funny. He's supposed to be harmless. But over the course of the show, over seasons and seasons, he also becomes a study in addiction and self-deception. And the show treats this with a directness and a honesty that most television wouldn't attempt. Most television would either ignore it or wrap it up with an inspirational message. South Park just watches him get worse and worse and keeps asking why. The specific episode I want to focus on is Bloody Mary from Season 9, Episode 14, aired December 7th, 2005. But this episode isn't the start of Randy's addiction story. This is just the one where it becomes explicit, where the show stops dancing around it and actually engages with the mechanism of addiction and recovery in a way that reveals something true about human nature. What happens in this episode is that Randy gets a DUI. He's arrested for drunk driving, and as punishment, he's ordered to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Now, this is where the show does something interesting. In the AA meetings, Randy is told that alcoholism is a disease, that he's powerless over it, that only a higher power can help him. And instead of questioning this, instead of engaging with the actual complicated truth of addiction, Randy takes it literally. He takes the worst interpretation of it and runs with it. If he's powerless, then he's not responsible. If it's a disease, then it's not his fault. If his power is gone, then he can just give up and wait for something external to save him. And so he gives up trying. He drinks more. He becomes more dysfunctional. He's convinced that he's not responsible anymore. He's waiting for divine intervention, which he eventually thinks comes in the form of a statue of the Virgin Mary that appears to be bleeding. And he becomes convinced that touching the statue, having this mystical experience, will cure him, that the miracle will fix what's broken inside him. But the resolution of the episode, and the thing that changed my understanding of addiction when I watched it, is that divine intervention doesn't come. The statue isn't actually miraculous. The Pope shows up and explains that the blood is just menstruation. It's completely normal. There's no miracle. There's no magic cure. And Stan basically tells Randy, look, nobody's going to fix this for you. You did this yourself. And if you actually have the discipline to be sober for however long it took for you to touch that statue, then you have the discipline to just stop drinking. That's not a revolutionary idea, obviously. People have understood for a long time that addiction recovery requires personal responsibility. But what South Park is doing in that moment is pushing back against the idea that you can understand addiction purely as a disease, a condition that happens to you, that you have no control over, that requires intervention from outside yourself. The show is saying that's not really true. It's more complicated than that. Addiction is a real thing. It's a real physiological and psychological problem. That's not what the show is arguing against. What it's arguing against is the idea that understanding it as a disease gives you permission to be helpless. That labeling your problem as something external, something that happened to you rather than something you're doing, absolves you of responsibility. The show is saying you're not powerless. You just have to recognize that the power is actually inside you, not waiting to be delivered by some external force, some angel, some miracle, some higher power that's going to swoop in and fix what you broke. And here's what really got me about this episode, and about Randy's arc in general. The show never says that drinking is bad. It never condemns Randy as a bad person. What it says is that Randy needs to develop the capacity to choose, to exercise actual decision-making power, rather than surrendering to the idea that he's a victim of his own impulses, that he's powerless, that addiction is something that happened to him. And that's a lesson that extends way beyond alcohol. It extends to any behavior you're trying to control, any habit you're trying to break, any pattern you're trying to change. Social media addiction, food, working too much, anxiety spirals, any pattern where you feel trapped. You have to stop waiting for the thing that will make you suddenly want to change. You have to stop waiting for the right medication, or the right therapy, or the right moment of clarity, or the right person to come along and save you. You have to exercise the choice right now, not when conditions are perfect, not when you feel like it. Now, you have to accept that the power is in your hands, and that no amount of waiting for the right moment, or the right inspiration, or the right outside event is going to change that. I think about Randy's character a lot, particularly in recent years as his role in the show has evolved and become darker, as he's become less of a comic relief and more of a genuinely tragic figure. As you watch him across the seasons, you watch him get worse. You watch him make mistakes that you've already seen him make. You watch him learn lessons and then immediately unlearn them. And that's not a bug in the show's portrayal of Randy. It's the point, because that's what real addiction and real self-destruction looks like. It's not a linear thing. It's not like you hit bottom and then you fix it. It's this spiral where you get a little better and then you relapse. You understand something and then you forget it. You make a choice and then you unmake it the next day. And what the show was trying to tell us through Randy, through this character who was supposed to be just a funny dad, but who became so much more than that, is something that took me years to understand. That you can be aware of your own problems. You can understand intellectually that you're doing something that's not working. You can go to meetings, you can talk to people about it, you can read books about it, you can have a therapist. You can even have a moment where you understand the problem perfectly clearly. You can have those moments over and over again, but until you actually move into action, until you actually exercise the choice and accept responsibility for that choice every single day, nothing changes. The awareness alone doesn't do anything. The understanding alone is worthless. It's just something to feel bad about. Knowledge is not power. Choice is power. Action is power. Consistent, repeated, boring, difficult action is what changes things. Understanding is just the starting point. It's the necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough by itself. So where are we? We've got 4 lessons now. Let me lay them out for you because they're important and they're building towards something. The first one, you can't please everyone. So you need to make choices in a world of imperfect options. This is the foundation. This is the moment you realize that perfect doesn't exist, that compromise isn't failure, that choosing the lesser evil isn't selling out. It's just being realistic about what's possible. The second one, you need to distinguish between tolerating something and approving of it. Once you accept that perfect doesn't exist, you have to figure out how to live with people who believe things you think are wrong. You have to learn to tolerate without endorsing. You have to get comfortable with disagreement without treating it as war. The third one, you need to ask, what's phase 2 when someone presents you with a plan that doesn't logically connect? This teaches you skepticism. This teaches you to listen critically. This teaches you that confidence isn't the same as knowledge, that enthusiasm isn't the same as having a real plan. And the fourth one, you need to accept that you have the power to change your own patterns, even when it feels like you don't. This brings it back to you. It brings it back to individual agency. It says that none of the structural stuff matters if you're not willing to take responsibility for your own choices. That understanding systems and institutions is important, but it's not an excuse. You still have to act. You still have to choose. You still have to take responsibility. Those are the starting points. Those are the foundations. Those are the lessons that opened the door for me to understand that this crude, offensive, deliberately shocking cartoon was actually trying to teach me something important about how to live. Because when you put them together, they create a framework, a way of thinking about the world, a way of seeing through the bullshit that everyone is trying to sell you. They teach you to be skeptical, but not cynical, to accept reality, but not surrender to it, to recognize that you don't have perfect options, but to make choices anyway, to tolerate things you disagree with while still being willing to disagree, to ask what's phase 2, and to understand that you're the only one who can change your own life. That's a complete worldview. That's a way to be in the world that works. And South Park was teaching it to us while we were laughing at animated children saying things we weren't supposed to say. And I think that's where we have to start if we're going to understand what South Park actually was. Because it never presented itself as educational. It never said, pay attention, this is important. It never had a teacher character delivering a moral while inspirational music plays. It just embedded these ideas into the spaces between the jokes, between the chaos and the gross out humor, and the things that would make anyone over the age of 40 feel like the world was ending. It trusted that if you were paying attention, you would find these lessons. And it trusted that if these ideas were actually true, if they actually matched up with how the world really works, then you would recognize them as true. You would feel them in your bones as true. You wouldn't need South Park to convince you. You'd just recognize yourself and your life reflected back at you. And you'd understand that yes, this is how it actually works. That's the foundation. That's the thesis I'm building toward as we go deeper. South Park contains genuinely life-changing wisdom. Not just entertainment, not just edgy comedy, not just shock value, designed to make parents nervous and teachers angry, but actual, functional, applicable wisdom about how to live. Wisdom that works, wisdom that holds up, wisdom that you can take into the real world and use every single day. And the reason I know this is because I've lived 30 years, and that wisdom has held up. Those lessons have kept working. They've kept being relevant. And if anything, they've become more relevant, not less, as the world has gotten more complicated and more confused about what it actually believes, as institutions have become less trustworthy, as it's become increasingly clear that the people in charge don't actually have answers. South Park understood that 30 years ago, and it was trying to tell us, you're going to have to figure this out for yourself. You're going to have to make peace with imperfection. You're going to have to distinguish between different kinds of disagreement. You're going to have to be skeptical of people who claim to have phase 2 when they haven't explained phase 1. And you're going to have to take responsibility for your own life instead of waiting for someone else to fix it. All of that. South Park was saying all of that, while also being extremely funny and gross and offensive, somehow managing to do both at the same time. Now, if you're enjoying this and you've made it this far, I'm genuinely grateful. Seriously, this kind of content takes a lot of time to put together. Rewatching old episodes, researching the production details, reading through fan discussions, trying to explain why a show about 4 kids in Colorado doing insane things actually matters. Why South Park's crude humor and shock value house some of the deepest thinking about morality and human nature you'll find anywhere. If this is resonating with you, subscribing really does help. It's completely free, and it tells the algorithm that you want more videos like this, that you want long-form analysis instead of 7-minute hot takes, that you're willing to sit with something complicated and uncomfortable, that you'd rather listen to someone think for hours than watch a quick video that tells you what to believe. And that's the kind of thing that makes creating these possible. It's how we keep making videos about South Park and philosophy and life at 2 in the morning for people who are trying to fall asleep. So yeah, subscribe if you haven't. If you already did, thank you. Seriously. It means the world. But let's keep going. Let's go deeper, because there's so much more to talk about. We're just getting started here. The next part is where it gets really interesting, because these first 4 lessons, they're the building blocks. They're the foundation. They're the core ideas that the show uses over and over in different contexts to talk about bigger things, more complicated things. Things about how society actually works, how power functions, why institutions fail people, why good intentions often have catastrophic results, why the world doesn't get better just because people feel like something should improve, why wanting something to be true isn't the same as making it true, why complexity isn't the same as confusion, why being aware isn't the same as changing. And I promise you, once you see how South Park builds from these foundations to those bigger ideas, everything else will make more sense. You'll understand why the show mattered. You'll understand why it still matters in 2026. You'll understand why it will keep mattering decades from now. You'll start to see the pattern underneath everything the show does. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You can't watch an episode the same way again. You can't listen to Kyle's speech at the end without understanding what it's actually doing, without recognizing what argument the show is making through that character in that moment. And that changes everything. That changes how you watch TV, how you read the news, how you interact with people, how you make decisions. Because you're not just learning random lessons or collecting facts about how things work. You're learning to think like South Park thinks. You're learning to see the world the way the show sees it. You're developing a critical eye, a skeptical mind, a framework for understanding why things happen the way they do. And once you can do that, once you can see the world through that lens, you understand why people have been watching this show, often at 2 in the morning when they should be sleeping, for nearly 3 decades. Why they keep coming back. Why they rewatch old episodes. Why they seek out clips on YouTube and fall asleep to them. It's not just entertainment, though it is that. It's not just edgy comedy, though it is that too. It's education. It's philosophy. It's someone saying, here's how to think about things. Here's how to see through the bullshit. Here's how systems actually work. Here's what actually matters. And if you listen, if you really listen, you learn. So let's talk about the internet, because South Park saw it coming. They saw all of it coming, and they tried to warn us. Look, I've watched Make Love Not Warcraft probably a dozen times putting this together. And what kills me is how perfectly South Park understood the internet's capacity for cruelty before most people even recognized it as a problem. The episode aired on October 4th, 2006. By the way, it won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2007. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you. A show about 4 kids getting fat and ruining their lives in World of Warcraft, nominated for a Creative Arts Emmy. And it deserved it, because underneath the macros and the comedy was a really dark observation about human nature. So here's what happens. The boys get completely obsessed with World of Warcraft. Like, genuinely addicted. They stop going to school. They stop eating real food. They're literally becoming these bloated, sedentary versions of themselves, and their parents are horrified. And that's funny. Sure, that's the surface level. But the deeper part, the part that made this episode actually matter, is about this griefer, this high-level player who has no other purpose except to make other people's lives miserable. He doesn't want to win. He doesn't care about gear or achievements. He just wants to hurt people. He plays the game for the pure satisfaction of watching other people be unable to enjoy themselves. And in 2006, South Park was saying, this is a new kind of cruelty that the internet has made possible. Think about it for a second. Before the internet, if you wanted to be a bully, you had limitations. You had to be in the same physical space as the people you were bullying. You had to live with the social consequences. You had to see the person's face when you hurt them. But the internet removed all of that. It gave people the ability to destroy other people's fun with zero accountability. You don't see the person. You don't know their name. You don't have to live with what you've done because you can just log out and move on to the next game, the next forum, the next place to cause chaos. And the griefer in that episode understands this perfectly. He's there to ruin things. That's his hobby. He's a high-level player with incredible gear and abilities, and his only goal is to make it impossible for other people to play. He camps spawn points. He hunts low-level players. He creates situations where they can't do anything except accept the suffering, and he smiles the whole time. And the show is saying, congratulations. The internet just made it possible for sadists to have a job, to have a purpose, to be functionally rewarded for pure cruelty with no repercussions whatsoever. Then season 20 happened, 2016, and suddenly the show did something I didn't expect. It went back to this idea, but made it real. Made it about someone we knew. Gerald, Kyle's dad, the character we'd been laughing at for like 15 seasons, turned out to be Skankhunt42. He was the troll. He was the one on message boards editing pictures of women and girls, putting their faces in horrible situations. He was the one driving them off social media. He was destroying people's lives for entertainment. And the worst part was that he didn't even see it as wrong. He'd listen to hard rock and drink wine and talk about his trolling like it was just a hobby, just having fun, just a guy being a guy. The episode called Skank Hunt aired on September 21st, 2016. And it wasn't really funny because by that point, we all knew Gerald. We'd watched him embarrass Kyle for years. He was annoying, sure. He was the kind of dad who was always making things about himself. But he was someone we understood. He was someone we'd come to care about in a weird way. And then suddenly, he was a monster. And I remember watching that episode and just feeling this cold realization. Because you realize that Gerald doesn't think he's a monster. He thinks he's being funny. He thinks he's clever. He thinks that the internet, this space where everyone's cruel and everyone's fighting, gives him permission to be cruel too. He's just participating in the chaos. He's just doing what everyone else is doing. And that's the thing that makes it so scary. He's not exceptional. He's not uniquely evil. He's just a guy doing what millions of other guys are doing. And those millions of guys are destroying people, are making it impossible for women to exist online, are making it dangerous to have a voice. And none of them see themselves as bad people. And here's what the show did that was really brilliant, really dark. It made you understand how he became one. It didn't excuse it. It didn't make you sympathize with him, but it showed you the mechanism. How the internet separates you from the consequences. How you can convince yourself you're just being funny, just trolling, just having a laugh, when you're actually destroying people. How you can dehumanize people so completely that you stop seeing them as people at all. They're just characters on your screen. They're just problems to solve. They're just obstacles to overcome. And season 20 kept going. It didn't stop at Gerald. The season spiraled into this nightmare of competing movements, women organizing against the trolls, and the whole thing became this massive cultural catastrophe. And South Park didn't flinch from showing you how bad it got, didn't soften the edges, didn't make it funny in a way that made you feel better. It made you watch it happen. That's the lesson I didn't understand when I was 13. The internet will destroy you if you let it. Not because the internet is evil, not because it's inherently bad, but because it gives your worst impulses room to breathe. It gives cruelty a place to hide. It lets you hurt people without having to see their pain. And once you understand that, once you really internalize what Gerald was doing, you can't unsee it. You can't go on Twitter or Reddit or TikTok and see someone being cruel in the comments and not think about Gerald. Not think about the person on the other side of that comment. Not think about what it would feel like to be that person. And you can't participate in that cruelty. Not even a little bit. Not even when everyone around you is doing it. Because you know what it looks like from the inside. You know what it becomes. It becomes your whole life. It becomes who you are. And nobody wakes up and thinks, today, I'm going to become a monster. It happens slowly. It happens one cruel comment at a time. It happens when you convince yourself that everyone else is doing it too. So it's fine. It's normal. It's just how things work. The internet didn't create human cruelty. It just amplified it. It made it easier. It made it possible to be cruel at scale. And South Park understood that. Understood it in 2006 and understood it even better by 2016. And what I learned from that, what I carry with me now, is the habit of asking, what does this comment do to the other person? Not as an abstract question. Actually imagine it. Actually think about what it would feel like to be on the receiving end. Think about whether this is something you'd say to someone's face. And if the answer is no, then you know what you're doing. You know what kind of person you're being in that moment. And you get to decide whether that's who you want to be. All About Mormons aired on November 19th, 2003, Season 7, Episode 12. And I need to tell you something about this episode because it changed how I think about people entirely. And I didn't even realize it at the time. It's this episode where a Mormon family moves to South Park, and the boy, Gary Harrison, is basically a perfect human. He's polite. He's kind. He's got this weird formal way of speaking that makes everyone else seem crude by comparison. And Cartman tries to become Mormon because he thinks they have some secret thing going on. Kyle tries to figure out what the actual theology of Mormonism is so he can prove it's nonsense. Stan just wants to be friends with Gary. But here's where it gets important. And I'm going to quote his speech because it's important to quote it exactly. Gary tells Stan, "Look, maybe us Mormons do believe in crazy stories that make absolutely no sense. And maybe Joseph Smith did make it all up. But I have a great life and a great family. And I have the Book of Mormon to thank for that. The truth is, I don't care if Joseph Smith made it all up. because what the church teaches now is loving your family, being nice, and helping people. Read that again. Let that land. Gary's saying, I know my religion is probably based on nonsense. I know that the foundation might be a lie. I don't care. Because what it's made me is a good person. And if being a good person is the outcome, does it matter whether the path to being a good person is factually true? I was not ready for that when I was younger. I thought I was cynical. I thought I had figured out all the ways religion was stupid. And I did. Religion has a lot of stupid parts. It has contradictions and historical problems, and it's used to justify awful things. All of that's true. But when Gary's standing there saying that he knows his beliefs are possibly nonsense and doesn't care, because the result is that he's kind and his family is close and he helps people, something shifted for me. Because what he's really saying is, it doesn't matter if you think I'm stupid. It doesn't matter if my beliefs are wrong. What matters is what I'm doing with those beliefs. Am I using them to hurt people? Or am I using them to try to be better? Am I using them as an excuse to be cruel? Or am I using them as a framework for kindness? And that's the thing that got me. That's the part that broke through my cynicism. Because I realized I'd been so focused on being right, on proving that religious people were believing in nonsense, that I wasn't even looking at whether the religious people I knew were actually good. I was too busy being smug about having figured out that their beliefs were probably false. And in doing that, in prioritizing being right over being kind, I'd become an asshole. I'd become worse than the religious people I was making fun of. Because at least they were trying to be good. At least their nonsense had a point. My cynicism was just cynicism. It wasn't trying to do anything except make me feel superior. And here's what really killed me about that realization. Gary's not stupid. The show makes it very clear that Gary's not naive or unintelligent. He understands exactly what he's saying. He knows the historical problems with Joseph Smith. He knows that the foundational stories of Mormonism are questionable. He knows that believing in this is a choice he's making despite the evidence, and he chooses it anyway, because he's decided that the outcome matters more than the truth, that being good matters more than being right. And I had to sit with that, had to really think about what that meant. Gary Harrison, the Mormon kid, is basically saying, I have accepted that my beliefs might be false, and I'm okay with it, because what my beliefs have made me is a good person. And if you can't respect that, if you can't look at someone being genuinely kind and generous to their family and say, that's good, then the problem isn't their belief system. The problem is you. Now, the show also did this with other episodes about religion. Go God Go was the two-parter from season 10, episode 12 and 13, that aired in November 2006. And that one's about the future, where religion has been eliminated, and everyone becomes an atheist. But instead of things getting better, they get worse. Instead of everyone being smart and rational, they splinter into different atheist sects that are just as dogmatic as any religion. They're just atheist dogmatism instead of religious dogmatism. And they fight just as hard. They hate just as much. They're just as willing to kill people over the details. There's atheist camps and atheist conferences and different schools of thought about how to practice atheism correctly. And they're all equally convinced that their version is right and all the others are wrong. And it's a mirror image of everything they were fighting against. It's the exact same violence, just dressed up in different language. So the lesson there isn't religion is good. The lesson is dogmatism is the problem. Whether you're dogmatic about religion or dogmatic about atheism, whether you're certain about God or certain about the absence of God, you've still lost the ability to think. You've still decided that your correctness is more important than other people's humanity. And that's the thing that kills you. Not whether your beliefs are factually true, whether you're willing to hurt people to defend them, whether you're willing to stop listening to other people because you've already figured out the truth. And once you've done that, once you've closed yourself off from the possibility that you might be wrong, you become dangerous. You become the enemy you were fighting against. And I think about that a lot now, especially in a world where everyone's so sure they're right, where everything's polarized, where saying, maybe I'm wrong about this, is treated like weakness. South Park was teaching us in 2003 that being right doesn't matter as much as being good. And in 2006, it was teaching us that the alternative to religion isn't automatically better if it's just a different kind of dogmatism. The goal isn't to have the correct beliefs. The goal is to figure out how to be decent to each other while we're all trying to figure out what's true. Kenny dies a lot, you know that. But there's a moment in season 5, episode 13, The episode's called Kenny Dies, and it aired on December 5th, 2001, where he doesn't come back. His death sticks, and the episode breaks something in the show. It breaks the safety net. Because up until that point, Kenny had died almost every episode for 5 seasons. It was a running joke. It was predictable. And suddenly, it's not. Suddenly you understand that death in this show might actually mean something. The hospital scenes are the gut punch. Stan can't bring himself to visit. He's scared. He tries to go, but he can't do it. He's not ready to say goodbye. And by the time he finally gets the courage, it's too late. Kenny's already gone, and the show doesn't soften this. Stan doesn't get to see him one last time. He doesn't get to say the things he wanted to say. The body's just gone, and the camera holds on Stan's face. That's all you see. Stan understanding that he waited too long. But here's what's important. The show killed Kenny, not to be shocking. It killed Kenny to teach us something about loss. About how you don't get to plan when you're going to lose someone. About how you can spend your whole life knowing someone and still not be ready for them to be gone. About how sometimes you don't get a goodbye. Sometimes the person you love just isn't there anymore, and you have to figure out how to live with that. Then there's Stan and Wendy. Raisins is the episode from season 7, episode 14, that aired December 10th, 2003. Wendy breaks up with Stan, and it's not a big deal. It's not a tragedy. It's just a breakup. But for Stan, it is a tragedy. It's his entire world falling apart. And the episode lets it be that. Doesn't minimize it. Doesn't say, oh, he'll get over it. Shows him spiraling. Shows him joining the goth kids because at least they feel things. Even if those things are practiced despair. At least they're not numb. And what's so cruel about the goth kids is that they're offering him a way to feel alive. Even if that way is through depression and nihilism. They're offering him an identity, a community, a reason to exist. And even though it's dark and self-destructive, it's better to him than the numbness he was experiencing before. That's what depression does to you. It makes you desperate enough to take refuge in darkness, just so you don't have to feel nothing anymore. And then Butters shows up. And Butters, beautiful Butters, says something that I've seen people reference for years when they're talking about depression. He says that he's sad. Yes, but the sadness means he felt something good first. It means he's alive. It means he's feeling things. And though he doesn't say it exactly this way, what he's really saying is, I'm depressed. And that's okay, because at least I'm alive and feeling. At least I'm not completely numb. But then there's You're Getting Old. That episode from June 8th, 2011. Stan turns 10, just turns 10. And suddenly, everything he loved is disgusting to him. The animation literally shows him seeing everything as piles of shit. His parents' sex life becomes garbage. His favorite movies become crap. Ice cream disgusts him. And it's funny in a gross out way, but it's also the most honest portrayal of depression the show had done at that point. Because that's what depression is sometimes. It's not sadness. It's not something you can fix with a hug or a positive affirmation. It's a complete rewiring of how you perceive the world. Things that used to bring you joy just don't anymore. Not because the things changed, because you changed. And you don't know why. And you can't fix it. Stan becomes unbearable. He pushes away everyone who loves him. He tells everyone everything is shit, and they get tired of hearing it. His friends abandon him. His parents divorce, partly because of his cynicism. He becomes completely alone. And the show is careful to show that isolation not as a moral lesson, but as a consequence. This is what happens when you decide nothing matters. You end up alone. But here's where I have to tell you something important. And I mean this with all the tenderness I can muster. Growth isn't a linear thing. You're Getting Old ends with Stan depressed and alone. It doesn't end with him learning a lesson that fixes it. And that's accurate. That's the real thing South Park was trying to teach. Growing up doesn't come with an instruction manual. It doesn't come with a moment where you suddenly have it figured out. It comes with gradually understanding that you probably never will have it figured out. And you have to keep going anyway. You have to get up and go to school, even though everything looks like garbage to you. You have to try to maintain friendships, even though you can't remember why they matter. You have to exist in a world that you're not sure has any meaning. And you do it because not doing it, giving up completely, is worse. And that's the lesson that took me the longest to understand. And I'm still understanding it, to be honest. Grief doesn't follow a timeline. Depression doesn't have an ending where you learn something and then you're fine. It's something you survive. And surviving is enough. You don't have to be happy. You don't have to feel like things matter. You just have to keep moving, keep showing up, keep trying. And there's this quiet strength in that. There's something real in continuing when you have no reason to believe continuing matters. There's something profound about saying, I'm broken, and I don't know how to fix it, so I'm just going to live here, in this broken state, and figure out what a life looks like anyway. I've watched people try to fix depression the way you'd fix a broken car. They think if they just get the right treatment, the right medication, the right therapist, they'll be cured. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you do get better, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to get up every day and do things even though there's no chemical reason why anything matters. You have to learn to be kind to people even though you can't feel kindness. You have to learn to participate in your own life even though it feels like you're watching from outside it. And that's not a failure. That's not you not trying hard enough. That's just what it looks like to be alive while you're broken. South Park taught me that. Taught me that depression isn't something to be cured. It's something to be integrated. It's something that becomes part of your life. And some days, you manage it. Some days, it manages you. And the goal isn't to win. The goal is just to be okay with not winning. The goal is just to keep going. And recognizing that, accepting that, letting go of the idea that you're going to wake up one day and suddenly be fine. That's the moment things actually get a little bit easier. Not easy, easier, because you stop fighting against the thing that's happening and you start trying to live alongside it. Breast Cancer Show Ever aired on October 15th, 2008. Season 12, Episode 9. And I want you to picture this. Wendy is doing this presentation about breast cancer awareness. It's sincere. She's trying to educate people. And Cartman mocks her. He makes fun of her for caring. He's cruel about it. And Wendy, who is generally a good person, gets angry. So angry that she threatens to beat up Cartman after school. Cartman spends the entire episode trying to avoid her. He lies. He manipulates. He defecates on the principal's desk to get detention, so he'll be locked away during the time he's supposed to meet her. He uses every trick he's learned over the years, and the show makes it abundantly clear that none of it works. Wendy's coming. She's going to fight him. And there's this Principal Victoria character, a woman who's a breast cancer survivor, and she tells Wendy something important. She tells her that she has to fight Cartman. She has to stand up to him, not because the fight itself matters, but because some people won't listen to anything except the willingness to fight back. That's the lesson. There's a cost to standing up. There's always a cost. You might lose. You might get hurt. You might look foolish. But Cartman has spent his entire life manipulating people. He's gotten away with things because people are uncomfortable with confrontation. People don't want to make things weird. People don't want to be aggressive. So Cartman uses that. He counts on it. Wendy breaks that pattern because she's willing to actually fight. And look, I'm not saying you should solve workplace problems with fistfights. I'm not saying confrontation always means violence. But the principle is real. Some people won't respect kindness. Some people won't respond to logic. Some people only understand consequences. And if you want to stop them, if you want to set a boundary that actually matters, you have to be willing to impose a cost. You have to be willing to say, this far and no further, and I will make you regret it if you cross this line. I've watched that episode so many times because I was the kind of person who avoided confrontation at all costs. I would rather lose than fight. I would rather be stepped on than stand up. And I thought that made me kind. I thought it made me peaceful. It just made me a doormat. I made myself available to be hurt because I wasn't willing to fight back. And the people in my life, some of them, not all, learned that they could treat me however they wanted, and I wouldn't do anything about it. And it got worse until I finally understood what Wendy understood, that sometimes you have to be willing to fight. Not because you're cruel, but because some people will only respect strength. They're counting on you not being willing to stand up. They're betting that you'll take it and keep taking it. And they're right until you prove them wrong. And once I understood that, things changed. I started saying no. I started setting boundaries. I started being willing to have difficult conversations and let them hurt. And people didn't like it. Some people got angry. Some people accused me of being mean. Some people distanced themselves because it was easier than dealing with someone who was suddenly willing to demand respect. But the people who mattered, the people who actually cared about me, respected it more. They respected the person who was willing to stand up for themselves more than they respected the person who just took whatever was given to them, because they realized that someone willing to stand up to them is someone who's actually making a choice to be around them, not someone who's trapped by their own fear. That's the thing about standing up. It costs something, but it also gives you something. It gives you respect. It gives you the ability to set boundaries. It gives you the knowledge that you can protect yourself. It gives you the dignity of deciding what you will and won't accept in your own life. And that matters more than being liked by everyone. That matters more than keeping the peace. Because peace, based on your own humiliation, isn't peace. It's just abuse that hasn't revealed itself yet. Here's the thing about South Park that most people miss. It's willing to be wrong. And that's rare. That's genuinely rare in comedy. It's rare in entertainment. It's rare in anything. Man Bear Pig aired on April 26th, 2006. And it was the show making fun of Al Gore, making fun of what South Park saw as alarmism around climate change, making fun of conspiracy thinking. It was clever. It was funny. It was also wrong. Because as the years went on, as climate change got more real and more measurable and more obviously catastrophic, South Park's position of superior skepticism started looking really stupid. And the show knew that. Trey Parker and Matt Stone knew that they'd been wrong. So in 2018, 12 years later, the show did something rare. In season 22, episodes 6 and 7, Time to Get Cereal, November 7th, 2018, and Nobody Got Cereal, they brought back Man Bear Pig and basically said, we were wrong. We mocked something we shouldn't have mocked. We were confident in something we didn't actually understand. And the boys in the episode realized this. They apologized to Al Gore, and Gore, in interviews afterward, said he was so impressed by what South Park did. He said it was a hell of a statement, and I need you to understand what that means. The show was wrong, in front of millions of people, made fun of something on national television, and 12 years later, it admitted it. It didn't try to defend the old position. It didn't make excuses. It said, we were wrong, and here's the consequence of being wrong for 12 years. And that's a lesson that I think applies to everything. Your heroes will disappoint you. Your cynicism will look foolish. Your certainty will be wrong, but you can come back from that. You can say, I was wrong, and people can actually respect you for it. In fact, they respect you more for it. Because changing your mind, actually genuinely changing your mind in response to new information, is one of the hardest things a human being can do. It's easier to defend a position you've already stated. It's easier to double down. It's easier to find reasons why you were actually right, and everyone else is just not understanding you correctly. But South Park looked at 12 years of being confidently wrong and said, nope, we're going to own this. We're going to admit it. And I've been thinking about that a lot, because there's something in the culture right now where changing your mind is treated as weakness, where saying, I was wrong about this, is treated as a failure, where people will do anything, contort logic, ignore evidence, get meaner, rather than admit they were wrong about something. I've watched people defend beliefs they don't actually hold anymore, because admitting they were wrong would be more painful than just lying about it. I've seen people hurt other people rather than admit they made a mistake. And that calculus is completely backwards. That's not protecting yourself. That's just digging in deeper. And South Park demonstrated that the opposite is true. The show looks better in retrospect for admitting it was wrong than it would have if it had just doubled down and defended the Man Bear Pig bit. Trey Parker and Matt Stone look smarter for being willing to change their minds. Not weaker, smarter. Because changing your mind means you're actually paying attention to the world. It means you're willing to update your beliefs based on new information. It means you're intellectually honest enough to admit when you made a mistake. And that's rare enough that when you see it, it's worth paying attention to. That's the lesson. Humility. The specific humility of being willing to be wrong and admit it. And the strength it takes to do that. Because it is strength. It's a harder thing than defending yourself. It's a harder thing than doubling down. It's the hardest thing to do because you have to let go of being right. And most of us are addicted to being right. We need it. We've built our identities around it. And to let that go, to say, I was wrong and I'm sorry, is to risk falling apart completely. But what South Park showed is that you don't fall apart. You just become smarter. You become more trustworthy. You become the kind of person people actually respect because you're not just defending yourself all the time. You're actually learning. Mr. Garrison transitions in Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina, which aired on March 9th, 2005, Season 9, Episode 1. And this is where it gets complicated, because the show doesn't do what you might expect. It doesn't celebrate the transition, and it doesn't condemn it. What it does is something more complex. It presents the transition as real and valid, and then it immediately undercuts any idea that it's going to make Mr. Garrison a better person. Mr. Garrison transitions, and she's still the same horrible, selfish, abusive person she was before. She's still mean. She's still manipulative. She's just a woman now. And she's still awful. And that's actually kind of respectful in a weird way. It's saying, your gender identity is real. It's valid. It's something that matters. And it's completely separate from whether you're a good person. You can be the right gender for yourself and still be a terrible person. And that's just how it works. But then there's Big Gay Al from way back in season 1, episode 4, Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, which aired way back in September 1997. Big Gay Al is explicitly gay, and South Park doesn't mock him for it. He's a good person. He loves animals. He loves the boys. He's kind and generous and genuine. And the show's message is simple. This is a person who happens to be gay. Let him live his life. And then Tweek and Craig. The show called the episode Tweek x Craig, and it aired in October 2015, season 19, episode 6. And here's where it gets really dark, actually. The fandom, the fan community, they were shipping Tweek and Craig. They were drawing them as a couple. They were pushing them to be together. And instead of letting them figure out their own sexuality on their own terms, the fan community basically forced them into a relationship. The show depicted this as a genuine problem. These two kids didn't choose to be together. They were pressured into it by fans on the internet who wanted it to happen. And the ultimate resolution was beautiful and complicated. They actually did fall in love. They figured it out on their own, in their own time, after the forced part ended. But the show was very careful to show the difference between being pushed toward an identity by external pressure and actually choosing that identity for yourself. That's the real lesson about identity. It's not something other people get to decide for you. It's not something you get to decide for other people. Your identity is yours. If someone tries to force you into a box, even if it's a box that might eventually be the right box, even if their intentions are good, that's not respecting your autonomy. That's violating it. Even if the outcome turns out to be something good, the violation is still the violation. And this is so important because we live in a world where everyone's constantly trying to push you into boxes. Your family has a box for you. Your culture has a box. Social media has a box. The internet has a box. Everyone wants you to fit neatly so they can understand you. But you don't fit neatly. None of us do. And the people who try to understand you before they try to fix you, those are the people worth paying attention to. I think about Tweek and Craig a lot because they represent this moment where fandom and shipping culture became so powerful that it actually affected real characters in a real story. And the show called that out. It said, this is not okay. Even if you're shipping them because you think it's cute, even if you genuinely believe this relationship is good for them, you don't get to force it. You don't get to bully them into conforming to your vision. They have to choose, and they did. But they had to choose after being pressured, after being given no other option, and that cost something. That's the point the show was making. Your identity is yours, not anyone else's to decide. And it took me a while to understand that, because I'd spent so much of my life trying to figure out what other people wanted me to be. What would make them happy? What would make them comfortable? And I'd constructed this identity based on what I thought other people needed from me, and I lost myself in that. I became a version of myself that people liked, but it wasn't me. And it took recognizing that I'd been pushing myself into a box my whole life, to start figuring out what I actually wanted, who I actually was. And that's the gift Tweek and Craig gave me. The permission to figure myself out on my own terms, without the pressure, without the expectations. Just me and whoever I am when I'm not trying to be what other people need. These are the lessons I've carried from South Park, not because the show was trying to teach them, but because the show was willing to look at hard things and not look away. The show is cynical about power structures and institutions, but it's genuinely, unironically humanistic about people. And maybe that's the real lesson underneath all of it. The systems are broken. The world is messy, but people matter. Trying matters. Being kind matters. And if you stop doing those things because you've become too cynical, or too hurt, or too convinced that nothing works, you'll lose the people you love. Kyle said it at the beginning of every episode for 15 seasons. But South Park spent all those seasons actually earning the right to say it. I learned something today, and I did. We all did, even when we were supposed to be just falling asleep. And here's something I think about a lot, something that haunts you if you really pay attention to the show. It's about Randy, and it's about money, and it's about how the things we chase can actually destroy us without us ever really understanding what happened. The thing about watching a character for 25 years of television is that you get to see how they change, not just episodically, but over seasons and seasons. You get to track the small erosions. You get to see when someone stops being themselves and starts being something else. And with Randy Marsh, you get to watch a man trade his identity for a trend. Randy Marsh starts out as a guy who's genuinely trying to provide for his family. He's a geologist. He's got a job. He's got a wife and a kid. He's not winning at life, not by a long shot, but he's trying. He shows up. He tries to do his best. And then the show does something really cruel and really smart. It watches him watch everyone around him get rich. It watches him see opportunity after opportunity. It watches him notice the trends. And it watches him slowly, methodically throw away everything about himself, trying to grab at the money floating past him. It's like watching someone disintegrate in real time, except they're smiling while it happens. The episode Medicinal Fried Chicken aired on March 31st, 2010, Season 14, Episode 3. And it's the moment where Randy's moral compass doesn't just break, it spins wildly and crashes. Colorado passes a law banning fast food in low-income areas. Cartman loses his mind because he's addicted to KFC. This is supposed to be the setup for a simple episode, right? Something funny about Cartman throwing a tantrum. Except Randy looks at the KFC location that's closed down. He looks at what takes its place. He sees it's become a medical marijuana dispensary, and something clicks in his head. Here's where it gets dark. Here's where you realize that the show isn't just doing physical comedy anymore. Randy has just gotten a clean bill of health from his doctor. Everything's fine. Everything's good. He should be celebrating. Instead, he's devastated. Because a healthy person can't get a medical marijuana prescription. A healthy person can't access the business opportunity. So Randy decides that he needs to give himself cancer, not to help sick people, not because he believes in medical marijuana, not because he cares about the cause, but because he wants the money, because he's learned that there's money in sick people. Because he's learned that if you pretend to care about helping people, people will give you money. So he literally irradiates his own testicles with a microwave. He microwaves his own balls to get cancer so he can sell weed and make money. And the episode plays this for laughs, which it is. But also, think about that for a second. Think about what that actually says. Think about what that reveals about who Randy Marsh really is. A man literally mutilates himself, deliberately causes himself medical harm, all because he saw an opportunity to make money. And that's the thing about Randy that makes him actually tragic in a way Cartman never is. He's not a villain in the way Cartman is. Cartman knows exactly what he's doing, and he does it anyway. He looks the camera in the eye and commits to cruelty. He's conscious and willful and proud of it. But Randy doesn't see himself as the bad guy. He doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. He just sees the opportunity. He looks at a marijuana dispensary and sees money. He looks at other people selling weed, and he convinces himself that if they're doing it, then it must be okay for him to do it too. That if everyone's chasing the trend, then he's just being smart. And if everyone's doing it, then it's not really doing anything wrong. It's just business. It's just entrepreneurship. It's just what successful people do now. It's just how you win in the modern world. By season 22, Randy doesn't work anymore. He's not the geologist. He's not the guy who tries. He's moved his entire family to a farm specifically to grow weed and sell it. Tegrity Farms. The name is supposed to be funny, right? Integrity. Except what it actually shows is how completely he's abandoned any integrity he ever had. He's chasing the money so hard that he's willing to move his entire family, change his entire life, sell a product that he doesn't believe in, just because he saw other people making money off of it. Just because the trend was there. And I want to be really clear about what the show is doing here, because it would be easy to just laugh at Randy. Just think, oh, what an idiot. He's a joke character being ridiculous. But the show's actually dissecting something. It's showing you how someone becomes a worse person, one small compromise at a time. It's showing you how rationalization works, how you can convince yourself that the thing you're doing is fine, is normal, is just how the world works now. The worst part, the part that actually gets me every time I think about it, is that Randy knows it's wrong. He knows. There are episodes where you can see him almost waking up, where there's this flicker of the old Randy, the guy who wanted to be a good provider, the guy who tried to care. But then he smokes weed, and he goes right back to being Karen. That's what he becomes. Not just a weed dealer named Randy, but a different person entirely. A version of himself that's meaner. That's more selfish. That doesn't recognize his own family anymore. And the show keeps asking this question. Which one is the real Randy? The one who knows it's wrong, or the one who does it anyway? Are they different people, or is one just the honest version of the other? And that's genuinely disturbing if you think about it, because it suggests that we're all capable of becoming someone we don't recognize. That the person we want to be, and the person we actually are, when money's on the line, might be two very different things. That the version of us that we show to the world might be the fake one, and the version we become when nobody's looking, when there's profit on the table, might be the real one. That's the lesson here, and it's not a comfortable one. Money doesn't just change your circumstances, it can change who you are. The things we chase can remake us completely, and the scariest part is that it happens gradually. You don't wake up one day thinking, I'm going to abandon my family's values. You don't think, today is the day I become a worse person. You just take the first opportunity, then the next one, then you rationalize it. Everyone's doing it. It's not that bad, it's just business. One more thing, just this once, just until we get ahead. And then one day, you look up and you're not the person you were anymore. You're someone else. And sometimes you don't even recognize the moment it happened. Sometimes you don't recognize it at all. You just think this is who you've always been. This is who everyone is. There's something the show keeps coming back to, and it's one of the saddest things in there. It's about how your childhood marks you. Not like destiny, not like you can't change, but like it leaves scars, deep ones. It shapes you in ways you don't always understand, until you're older, and you're looking back thinking, oh, that's why I do that. That's where that comes from. That's why I need that. That's why I'm afraid of that. The boys of South Park are frozen in their childhood, but that also means we get to see clearly what their childhoods actually cost them. The boys of South Park are perpetually 8 years old. They reset after every episode. They go to the same school. They wear the same clothes. The show plays with time in this really strange way where they're frozen in childhood, but also somehow aging through 25 years of television. And because of that, we get to see what childhood trauma actually does to you. Cartman's arc is the most visceral one. We learn in the season 1 episode, Cartman's mom is a dirty slut, February 25th, 1998. That Cartman's parentage is a mystery. His mom has been with basically everyone in town. The whole episode is this mystery of who his father is. And then the show waits. It waits 12 seasons. And in the 200th episode, 201, which aired in 2010, we get the answer. Cartman's father is Jack Tenorman, and Jack Tenorman is also the father of Scott Tenorman, which means Scott is Cartman's half-brother, and which also means that in the earlier episode, Scott Tenorman must die. Cartman killed his own father and fed him to his half-brother. He didn't know that at the time. He was just being Cartman. But the show doesn't let us forget it. It plants these bombs in your childhood and then detonates them years later. The weird part is that Cartman doesn't actually care about any of this the way you'd expect. When they tell him who his father is, he's not upset about the revelation. He's not grieving. He's not having some big emotional moment about finally knowing his paternity. He's not thinking about what his father meant to him, or how he feels about having killed him 12 years earlier. No. He's upset because he finds out he's half ginger. He's upset that his father had red hair. That's the thing that breaks him. That's the only thing he can focus on. And I think that's actually genius screenwriting, because it shows you, without even having to say it, what really matters to him. Not family, not belonging, not knowing where you come from, but his own image, his own status, his own vanity, how he's perceived. And that makes complete sense. That's what his childhood taught him. His mother never cared about anything but herself. She never really wanted him as a person. She was just using him for her own purposes. She was sleeping with every man in town and didn't even know which one was his father. So he learned to do the same thing. He learned that love is transactional, that people use each other, and he learned to care about himself and nobody else first. Kenny's childhood is different, but maybe worse because it's so quiet. Kenny lives in poverty. His parents are addicts. The show doesn't hide this, and I respect that about the show. It doesn't try to make poverty funny, it just shows it. In the season 15 episode, The Poor Kid, which aired on November 16th, 2011. Kenny's family is running a methamphetamine lab in their backyard. The state gets involved. Social services comes in. He gets taken away from his parents. He ends up in the foster care system with a family that doesn't understand him. And the thing that kills me about that episode is that Kenny doesn't complain. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't have a breakdown. He just accepts it. He just tries to protect his little sister because she's scared. He becomes Mysterion. He puts on that costume and he becomes the hero that she needs him to be because nobody else is going to do it. Nobody else is going to protect her. So it has to be him. That's what poverty teaches you. It teaches you early that the world isn't safe, that you can't depend on anyone, that if you want something to change, you have to change it yourself, that sometimes you have to pretend to be someone else, someone stronger, someone more powerful, just to survive, just to keep the people you love alive. Kyle has his mother, Sheila Broflovsky, and she's a really interesting character because she means well. And that's important because it would be easy if she was just evil and awful, but she's not. She genuinely thinks she's doing the right thing. She genuinely thinks she's protecting her son, but she's also suffocating. She controls everything. She campaigns against anything that scares her. She uses Kyle to make her point. She's convinced that the world is full of dangers that need to be fought, and so she fights them. And Kyle gets to watch his mother scream at people, get dragged away by security, start movements, and he learns from that. He learns that being right is more important than being kind. That winning the argument matters more than the relationship. He learns that love is expressed through control. That if someone loves you, they tell you what to do and they don't let you make your own choices. And so Kyle grows up thinking that the world is dangerous, that he needs protection, that he needs to be defended by people who know better than him. And he becomes this kid who's always trying to prove something, always trying to be the smartest one in the room, always needing to win the argument, always needing to be right, because that's what he learned. That safety comes from being right. That love is about being controlled for your own good. That if you're not winning, you're losing, and you're in danger. Stan's got his father, Randy Marsh, which we just talked about. But the thing about Stan is that he's old enough to understand what's happening. He watches his father disintegrate, slowly, year after year. The episode Bloody Mary from season 9, December 2005, is all about Randy's alcoholism. And Stan's not a little kid anymore at this point. He's old enough to understand what's actually going on. He's watching his dad get worse and worse. He's watching this man who's supposed to be strong and reliable and a role model just get smaller and smaller, drinking more, caring less, making worse and worse decisions. And Stan's terrified because the genetic lottery isn't funny anymore. It's not some quirky character trait he can laugh about. It's terrifying. It's personal. It's him. He's a marshman. His father is a drunk, which means he could be a drunk, which means maybe that's just what he is. That's the episode Trapped in the Closet, where Stan genuinely worries out loud that he's going to become his father, that he's going to wake up one day and he's Randy, that he's going to be a drunk womanizer who doesn't know who he is anymore, that he's going to have lost himself completely. And that fear, that genuine, realistic fear that stays with him, you can see it throughout the entire series. Stan's always trying to be better than his father, always trying to be the stable one, the responsible one, the normal one, the one who's got it together, because he's so afraid that if he stops paying attention, if he looks away for 1 second, he's going to become Randy, and it'll be too late to stop it. And that's the lesson. Your childhood shapes you. It marks you. Sometimes it breaks you. But, and this is the important part, it doesn't have to define you. Cartman chose to be selfish, but he didn't have to. Kenny could have given up, but he didn't. Kyle could have spent his whole life needing to be right, but he learned to let that go, at least sometimes. Stan could have become his father, but he fought it. He actively chose to be different. Because here's the thing the show keeps emphasizing. You're not locked into the patterns your childhood created. You're not doomed to repeat them, but you have to know they're there first. You have to understand where they came from. You have to see them operating in yourself. And then you have to make the choice to do something different. And you have to keep making that choice over and over, because the old patterns are comfortable. They're familiar. Even if they're destroying you, at least you know them. Stan didn't have to be different from Randy. He could have just accepted that this is his fate, that he's a marshman and marshmen are drunks and fuck-ups. But he didn't. He got angry at it. He fought it. He's terrified of it, which means he thinks about it, which means he has some control over it. Whereas Randy doesn't even seem to recognize that he's repeating his own family patterns. He just is what he is. The show doesn't give you the message that everything's okay and it all works out. Some of these kids do carry these marks their whole lives. Some of them still struggle with these demons when they're adults, but it shows you that the marks are there. It shows you what they mean, and it asks you to think about what marks you're carrying. What did your childhood teach you about love, about safety, about who you're allowed to be, about your own worth? And are those lessons still serving you? Or are you just running on autopilot, doing what you learned when you were 8 years old, before you knew any better, before you had any choice? The lesson isn't that you can escape your childhood. It's that you can understand it, and understanding it is the first step to not being completely controlled by it. PC Principal shows up in Season 19, Episode 1, which aired September 16th, 2015. And he's a perfect encapsulation of something the show has been watching with this combination of fascination and dread for years. He represents what happens when you believe so strongly in being right that you stop thinking about what you're actually doing. When your need to be on the right side becomes more important than actually understanding what's right. When you start caring more about how you're perceived than about what you actually believe. The episode is called Stunning and Brave, and the whole thing is about how cultural movements, even good ones, especially good ones, can become corrupted by the people who think they're protecting them. PC Principal isn't presented as a villain exactly. He thinks he's a good person. He thinks he's making the school better. He's fighting racism. He's fighting discrimination. These are real things. These matter. But he's gone so far into the ideology that he's lost the actual humanity. He's attacking people for not being perfect. He's using violence against people who don't use the right words. He's so sure he's right that he stops listening to anyone else. And I need to be careful here, because the show isn't saying that fighting discrimination is bad. It's not saying that having principles is wrong. It's saying something much more specific. It's saying that when your principle becomes more important than the people you're supposedly helping, you've crossed a line. When the movement becomes about enforcing conformity instead of creating change, you've become part of the problem. And the scary part is that the show understands that this is seductive. This is appealing, because conformity feels safe. There's something deeply comforting about just going along with what everyone else is saying. You don't have to think. You don't have to worry that you're wrong, because everyone's saying it, so it must be right. Conformity feels like you're part of something bigger than yourself, like you're on the right side, on the winning side. If everyone's saying the same thing, if everyone's thinking the same way, then you must be okay. You can't be wrong if everyone agrees with you. And so people adopt the language. They adopt the ideology, not because they've sat down and actually thought about it, but because it's the thing that's happening, because it's the trend, because everyone at the party agrees with it, because there's social pressure, because the penalty for not conforming is isolation and shame, because if you don't say the thing everyone's saying, you're marked as a bad person, you're marked as a problem, and who wants to be a problem? Kyle fights PC Principal. Kyle refuses to just conform. Kyle uses his brain, and PC Principal's response isn't to engage with Kyle's argument. It's to punish him for not conforming. Detention, humiliation, violence. Because Kyle isn't just wrong in PC Principal's head. Kyle is dangerous. Kyle is the kind of person who thinks for himself, who asks questions, who refuses to just follow the group. And that's dangerous to a conformist ideology. That's the thing that reveals that maybe everyone agreeing doesn't mean everyone's right. Maybe it just means everyone's scared. The lesson is about what happens when you care more about appearing to be good than actually being good. When you care more about signaling your beliefs to other people than understanding what those beliefs actually mean. When you're more interested in punishing the people who disagree with you than in persuading them. That's when your ideology becomes just as closed-minded as whatever you were fighting against. You just have better marketing. And look, the show isn't saying that progressivism is bad. It's not saying that fighting against discrimination is wrong. It's saying that when you make your ideology about conformity instead of change, you've lost the plot. You've become the thing you were fighting against. You're just a different flavor of bully now. A bully who thinks they have moral authority. A bully who thinks they're helping people. Which is actually more dangerous than the regular kind of bully. Because at least regular bullies know they're assholes. At least they're not lying to themselves about what they're doing. PC Principal represents the most insidious kind of conformity. The kind that wears a righteous mask. The kind that tells you you're helping if you just think what everyone else is thinking. The kind that doesn't let you ask questions or have doubts. The kind that makes you feel like if you're not 100% on board, you're complicit. And the show keeps asking the question, when does your crusade for progress become just another crusade for control? When you've become so focused on winning that you've forgotten what you're actually fighting for. Stan and Kyle have been friends for 25 years. They've fought, they've broken up, they've reconciled. And every single time, there's this pattern. They disagree about something. It seems important in the moment. It tears them apart. And then they remember that the friendship is more important than being right about whatever specific thing they were fighting about. Or they don't remember it. And then they suffer for a while. And then they find their way back. And each time they do, they understand a little bit more about what it actually means to love someone. Guitar Queer O is from Season 11, Episode 13, November 7th, 2007. Stan and Kyle get into Guitar Hero. They're amazing at it together. They break the scoring record. And then this talent agent shows up and tells Stan that he's holding Kyle back, that Kyle isn't good enough. And Stan believes it. He dumped Kyle. He forms a band with this other kid named Thad, and Kyle's alone. Kyle's playing to almost nobody. Kyle's broken. And the episode shows you what that looks like. It shows you the loneliness. It shows you the humiliation. It shows you what it feels like to be replaced by your best friend. But then Stan hears "Carry On, Wayward Son" on the radio, the song from their big Guitar Hero moment, and he remembers. He remembers what it felt like to be great with Kyle. He remembers that the success didn't matter if Kyle wasn't there. The records and the contracts and the fame, none of it means anything without Kyle there to experience it with him. So he goes to find Kyle. And Kyle's mad at first. Kyle has every right to be mad. Stan betrayed him. Stan chose some random kid over their entire friendship. But then they apologize. And they get back together. And they break the record one more time. And this time, they both know that they're going to do it together. The thing about Stan and Kyle is that they fundamentally disagree about things. Kyle's the moral one. Kyle's the one who cares about being right. Kyle's the one who will die on a hill if he thinks he's right. Stan's the pragmatist. Stan's the one who wants to move on. Stan's the one who's willing to compromise. And they drive each other crazy because of this. But they also balance each other. Kyle keeps Stan from becoming a sociopath. Stan keeps Kyle from disappearing up his own moral ass. And the show has them break up, reconcile, break up again, reconcile again across the entire series. They've broken up over whether the show's making fun of the right people, over whether they should stay in South Park or move away, over stupid video game bullshit, over real moral conflicts, over Wendy, over music, over everything. And every single time, the recovery follows the same pattern. One of them remembers that the friendship matters more than winning the argument, that being right doesn't matter if the person you care about isn't there to share it with you. This is something I think about a lot because it's completely counter to how we're taught to think about friendship now. We're taught that friendship is something you have with people who agree with you, people who understand you, people who validate your worldview. And if your friend disagrees with you, especially about something important, then maybe they're not your real friend. Maybe you need to cut them off. Maybe the friendship was fake all along. Maybe they were never actually on your side. South Park says no. South Park says that real friendship is when you disagree and you stay. When you fight and you still show up. When you say things that hurt each other and you apologize and you figure it out. Because friendship isn't about always being right. It's not about finding someone who mirrors your exact beliefs back at you. It's about deciding that the other person matters more than being right. Even when you think you're right, especially then. And Stan and Kyle do this over and over. They're not always successful. There are episodes where they're just broken and it takes longer to heal, but they never stop trying. They never just walk away and say, well, that's it, we're done. They keep coming back. They keep fighting. They keep loving each other through the disagreements. And I think that's something we've forgotten how to do. I think we've bought into this idea that loyalty means total agreement. That friendship means you have to believe the same things. That if you disagree with someone about something important, you're basically enemies. And South Park keeps showing you that no, that's not what friendship is. Friendship is messier than that. It's harder than that. It's having someone you love and you disagree with them. And it sucks and you want to walk away. And you don't because they matter too much. Because they've been there for you when you needed them. Because you've been there for them. Because you have history. Because that matters. That's a lesson about how to actually be a good person. Not how to look like a good person. Not how to feel good about yourself. Not how to be morally superior to people who disagree with you. But how to actually show up for people, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Stan and Kyle aren't perfect friends. They say terrible things to each other. They betray each other. They hurt each other. But they also forgive each other. And they come back. And they try again. And that's everything. That's the core of actually being good. Not the performance. The actual work of loving someone even when you disagree with them. Even when they disappoint you. Even when it would be easier to just walk away. Because friendship, real friendship, is a practice. It's a choice you make over and over. It's not something you have once and then get to take for granted. It's something you have to keep choosing. You have to choose it even when it's inconvenient. Even when the other person's being stubborn. Even when they're right and you're wrong and you have to admit that. Especially then. That's where the work is. That's where it gets hard. And the thing about watching Stan and Kyle for 25 years is that you realize something. They're not friends because they're perfect for each other. They're not friends because they agree about everything. They're friends because they've chosen to be. They've chosen it enough times that it's become something real, something that survives the fights and the betrayals and the disappointments. They've built something together by showing up for each other, even when it hurt. And I think that's maybe the most important lesson the show teaches. Not that you need to find your soulmate who understands you completely. Not that the right friendship should be effortless. But that real friendship is built by people choosing each other over and over, even when it's easier not to, especially then. And then, around the year 2010, South Park did something that changed the entire conversation about what the show actually was. Because by then, Matt and Trey had spent 14 years being told that what they did was just shock value, that it was crude for crude's sake, that they didn't actually believe in anything. And maybe in those early seasons, there was some truth to that. But by episode 200 and 201, airing on April 14th and April 21st that year, they forced everyone to confront what they'd actually been doing all along. And here's where South Park actually became dangerous. Because up until this point, what I've been describing is a show that was bold and offensive and willing to push boundaries. But there's a difference between being bold and taking a genuine risk. There's a difference between offending people and actually standing up for something that costs you. Episodes 200 and 201 aired back-to-back on April 14th and April 21st of 2010. And I need you to understand what was happening in those episodes. Because it wasn't just a two-part special bringing back every celebrity South Park had ever made fun of. It was Matt and Trey making a choice about what their show actually stood for. And that choice had real consequences. The episodes centered on the town of South Park being visited by the ghosts of dead celebrities. All of them. Marilyn Monroe, Steve Irwin, Patrick Swayze, David Bowie, George Carlin, all of them showing up to demand apologies from the boys. These episodes were built on the infrastructure of 200 episodes worth of celebrity mockery, the show calling back to nearly a decade of targets. And to resolve this crisis, the boys have to get Muhammad to come to town as well, which immediately sounds simple until you realize that depicting Muhammad was something that was already controversial in animation. This wasn't hypothetical. This was Matt and Trey knowingly walking into a minefield. This was them taking the most sensitive religious figure in contemporary global politics and making him central to their narrative. And they did it anyway. They had Muhammad appear in the episode, not ironically, not as a joke, as part of a direct argument about the nature of free speech and what it costs to exercise it. Because in the episode, Muhammad doesn't do anything. He just shows up. And that's the entire point. The episode is about the fact that some people believe that even depicting the prophet is a violation deserving of violence. That there are people in the world who will kill you for drawing a picture. And that when a society allows violence to censor art, that society has already lost something fundamental. So Kyle delivers this massive speech at the end. A real speech, not a joke, where he's trying to explain to the entire town that freedom of speech is something that you have to actually defend, that it's not automatic, that it costs you something to keep it. And in the original script, Kyle lays out the moral argument. He explains why speaking freely, even when it offends people, is more important than avoiding offense. He talks about intimidation, about how when you respond to art with threats, you're not winning an argument, you're shutting down the conversation. You're saying that violence is a valid response to disagreement. And then Comedy Central censored it. Not some of it, almost all of it. They bleeped out Muhammad's name. They obscured the entire monologue where Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus try to explain the actual moral framework of the episode. Because the network was scared. Because there were real threats. Because Matt and Trey had been warned that there was a genuine possibility they could be killed for what they were putting on television. The death threats weren't empty. They weren't hollow internet bravado. They were credible enough that the network took them seriously. The network looked at what Matt and Trey had created and decided that the principle wasn't worth the risk. Think about that for a second. The show set out to teach you about free speech by literally having that speech censored in real time, by showing you what happens when people are too scared to defend the right to speak. The censorship wasn't a thing that happened to the episode. It was part of the episode. Matt and Trey had forced the network to make a choice, and the network chose fear. I remember the controversy around those episodes when they aired. The death threats were real. There were actual warnings from people saying that Matt and Trey could be killed for this. And the temptation must have been overwhelming to just apologize. To say, okay, you're right, we went too far. To back down and move on to something safer. But they didn't. They kept making the show. They kept defending their position. They gave interview after interview explaining that they weren't trying to incite violence. They were trying to defend the principle that you should be allowed to draw a picture of somebody's religious figure without being threatened with death. And the fact that defending that principle got them death threats only proved their point. That's when I realized that South Park wasn't just a comedy show anymore. It had become a statement. Matt and Trey were risking their actual lives to defend the idea that art should be free, that comedy should be free, that you shouldn't have to censor yourself out of fear. And they were doing it on a mass medium, on Comedy Central, in front of millions of people, with nothing to protect them but the principle that what they were doing mattered. The 11th lesson is about free speech. But it's not about free speech as an abstract concept. It's about free speech as a practice that requires actual courage. It's about understanding that the right to speak freely isn't something that you just get because it exists. It's something that you have to defend over and over, even when defending it costs you. And the thing that Matt and Trey taught you, by their actions, and not just their words, is that the people who are willing to pay that cost are the ones who actually determine what kind of society you live in. If everyone who could speak freely chooses to stay quiet because they're scared, then pretty soon, nobody's speaking freely. The society becomes shaped by fear instead of by truth. And that's what the episode was really about. The censorship that happened after episodes 200 and 201 aired didn't kill South Park. It didn't shut them down, but it did show what the cost of free speech actually is. It's the knowledge that what you say might get you killed, that there are people out there who believe they have the right to silence you through violence, and you have to be willing to speak anyway. That's not something they teach you in civics class. That's something South Park taught you by doing it, by being willing to accept the death threats, by being willing to have their work censored, by continuing to make the show anyway, knowing that some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. But somewhere around 2010, 2011, South Park itself was getting older. The show had been on the air for over a decade. The creators were in their 40s, and the show wasn't afraid to let you see what that felt like, to let you watch what aging actually does to a person, to let you see what happens when you become aware of the truth. You're Getting Old is the kind of episode that doesn't feel like South Park at first, because on the surface, it's the setup we've seen 1,000 times. Stan has a birthday. He turns 10. It should be a celebration. It should be just another episode about kids being kids in their eternal 4th grade existence. We all know the formula. Stan gets into some situation. The kids make it worse. Kyle learns something. Everything resets. It should be exactly like the 215 episodes that came before it. But instead, the episode does something that violated one of South Park's most fundamental rules. The kids don't stay in 4th grade. They age up. And the moment that happens, everything changes in a way that the show can't undo. Suddenly, Stan looks at his parents and sees them having sex. He listens to his parents' old music and hears it as noise. He goes to parties and can't understand why anyone is having fun. Everything that he used to think was cool is suddenly disgusting to him. Everything that mattered yesterday is meaningless today. And the episode isn't treating this as a joke. It's treating it as a tragedy. And here's what kills me about that episode. It's not trying to be funny in the traditional sense. It's trying to be real. Stan's depression isn't a plot device. It's not something that gets resolved by the end of the episode. It just sits there. It's the entire episode. A 10-year-old kid realizing that something inside him has shifted and he can't shift it back. I've rewatched that episode so many times, and I notice something different every time. The way the animation changes when Stan sees something through his depressed filter. Everything gets covered in shit. Literally, the entire world becomes covered in feces in his vision, because that's what depression feels like when you're a kid, and you don't have the language for it yet. The world just looks wrong. Everything looks disgusting, and you don't know why. 2 weeks later, the show aired Asperger's, and on the surface, it's just a stupid pun. Cartman mishears Asperger's syndrome as Asperger's and opens a food stand. It's exactly the kind of crude joke that South Park is famous for, but the genius underneath it is something else entirely. Because what the episode is really saying is this: Stan's depression is misdiagnosed as a medical condition. His parents want there to be something wrong with him that can be fixed. A disease, a syndrome, something with a name and a treatment and a cure. Because the alternative is scarier. The alternative is that their kid is just learning what the world actually is. That he's becoming aware of how much shit there is. And there's no medical fix for that. You can't take a pill and make the world less awful. You just have to learn to live inside the awfulness. And that's the thing that Cartman's Asperger stand represents. It's the false solution, the distraction, the way that people try to avoid dealing with real problems by creating busy work, by treating symptoms instead of acknowledging that sometimes the illness is just existence itself. I think about that a lot, actually, because growing up isn't supposed to be a tragedy. It's supposed to be this positive thing. You get older, you get smarter, you get stronger, you get more independent. But what South Park understood that a lot of other shows don't is that growing up also means getting aware. It means understanding all the things that were hidden from you when you were small and stupid. It means looking at the world with your eyes open and realizing that it's broken in ways that you can't fix. Stan doesn't recover from his depression by the end of You're Getting Old. He doesn't have an epiphany. He doesn't make a choice to be happier. He just accepts it. In the final scene, he's sitting with his parents and he's still depressed, still seeing the world filtered through shit, but he's functional. He's eating dinner. He's existing within the depression instead of trying to fight it. And I've thought about this a lot because I think that might be the most honest portrayal of mental illness that I've ever seen on television, because it doesn't pretend that awareness goes away. It doesn't say that you learn to unsee things. It says that you learn to function despite seeing them. You learn to eat dinner while the world looks like shit to you. You learn to go to school. You learn to keep trying, even though you know that trying might not matter. That's the 12th lesson. Growing up isn't about getting older and figuring it all out. Growing up is about getting older and realizing you're never going to figure it out. It's about learning to live with that knowledge. And the lesson that South Park taught you through Stan's depression and the show's refusal to resolve it is that that's enough. You don't need to be happy. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to keep going. But Butters, though, God, Butters is the entire key to understanding what South Park actually believes about how to live. Because Butters is the character who should be the most broken, who should be the most cynical, who should have the most reason to give up on being good to people. If the show follows any kind of consistent logic, Butters should be the villain. He should be the one whose suffering turns him cruel. He should be the one who weaponizes his pain against the world. I'm talking about Butters' very own episode, which aired on December 12th, 2001. And I need you to understand that this wasn't a gentle introduction to Butters' character. It was brutal. Butters innocently discovers that his father has been secretly visiting gay bathhouses and porn theaters. He doesn't even understand what he's seen. He just reports it to his mother like it's nothing, and his mother completely unravels. She drives their car into a river with Butters inside, trying to drown him, because she can't face the reality of her husband's secret life, and decides Butters shouldn't have to grow up in the aftermath. His own mother tries to kill him. And then both parents lie about it to the press, claiming he was abducted, joining a club of people who've blamed crimes on imaginary suspects. His entire introduction as a central character is built on betrayal by the people who are supposed to protect him. And the show shows you all of it. It doesn't pull punches. It doesn't make it cute or comedic in the traditional sense. It just shows you a child being hurt by the people closest to him. And here's the thing that South Park understood, and this is the thing that separates it from almost everything else on television. The episode doesn't make Butters evil. It doesn't follow the typical trajectory where you show someone being hurt and then they grow up to hurt other people. That's the revenge narrative. That's what we're used to seeing. The hurt person becomes the person who hurts others, and their suffering is justified because look at what happened to them. Instead, what happens is that Butters survives. He has this moment where he's at his lowest, where everything has fallen apart, where he's been beaten and betrayed and violated, and he doesn't break. He doesn't become cruel. He chooses to believe that things can get better, and he starts being nice to people anyway, which is almost incomprehensible. That's almost incomprehensible. That's not how trauma is supposed to work, but that's what Butters does, again and again, throughout the series. In Margarine, which aired on October 26th, 2005, Butters dresses up as a girl and infiltrates a slumber party, and the girls are hostile to him at first. They make fun of him. They're mean, and then he cries, and something changes. Suddenly, they feel bad for him. Suddenly, they care, and they make up for it by being kind. And what kills me is that Butters learns from this. He learns that vulnerability creates connection, that crying, which should be weakness, is actually a form of strength, because it allows other people to see him and to care about him. He learns that the way to survive in a world that's cruel is not to become cruel yourself. It's to be so honest about your pain that other people have to care. He shows up again and again throughout the show's entire run, being the person who's willing to admit that he's hurt, who's willing to be vulnerable in a world full of people pretending they don't care about anything, who's willing to be kind even though kindness is constantly punished in South Park, and the show never treats him like he's stupid for this. That's the thing that matters. In a show that's built on cynicism and the belief that everyone is selfish and the world is horrible, Butters is proof that there's another way. Not a way that's easy, not a way that works out perfectly, but a way that's based on the idea that how you treat people matters more than protecting yourself. I think about the contrast between Butters and Cartman constantly. Because Cartman is the character who learned that the world is selfish and cruel, and so he became selfish and cruel. He weaponized his intelligence. He learned to manipulate people, and it works for him. He gets what he wants, but he's alone. He's constantly being punished. He's constantly failing at actual human connection because he's built his entire life on the assumption that everyone else is his enemy. Butters, on the other hand, has been hurt more than Cartman ever has. His own mother tried to drown him. His father's secrets nearly destroyed his family. He's constantly getting tricked and manipulated by the other kids. But he doesn't respond to that by becoming cruel himself. He responds by becoming more kind, more willing to trust, more willing to believe in the goodness of people despite overwhelming evidence that they don't deserve his trust. And the show says that he's right, not in a naive way, but in a fundamental way. Butters understands something that all the other characters are missing. He understands that you get to choose how to respond to the cruelty of the world. You get to choose whether cruelty gets to define you. And his choice is to define himself by kindness instead. This is the lesson that ties everything else together. Because cynicism is easier. Cruelty is easier. It's easier to look at the world and decide that everyone sucks, and therefore you should just take what you want and not care about anyone else. But Butters is saying no. Butters is saying that even though everyone sucks, and even though the world is horrible, the choice that matters is the choice to be kind anyway, to keep trusting people, even when they prove that they don't deserve your trust. The 13th lesson is empathy, but it's not passive empathy. It's not just understanding that other people are suffering and then doing nothing about it. It's active empathy. It's the choice to be kind to people, even when you have every reason to be cruel. It's the choice to trust people, even when they've given you evidence that they'll betray you. It's the choice to keep believing in the possibility of human connection, even though connection constantly fails. Butters is proof that that choice is possible, that you don't have to become cynical just because the world is cruel, that you can look at all the shit that the world has done to you and still choose to do good. And the show treats that choice like it's the most important thing that anyone can do, because it is. Because in a world full of people protecting themselves and hurting others in the process, the people who choose to be vulnerable and kind are the ones who actually change things. And then there's douche and turd, from October 27, 2004. And I know I've talked about this episode already, but I need you to really sit with what it's actually saying, because this isn't just about an election. This is about the fundamental choice that you have to make about how to live. Stan doesn't want to vote, and his reasoning is solid. The two candidates are a giant douche and a turd sandwich. They're both terrible. The choice between them is meaningless, and so Stan decides to abstain. He decides that refusing to participate is a valid response to a broken system, and the town turns on him for it. His parents get angry. Other kids mock him. The entire social structure of South Park begins to exile him because he's refusing to participate in something that everyone else has decided matters. And eventually, the mob forces him out of town. Here's what kills me about that. Stan is right. The choice really is meaningless. The two candidates really are both bad, but his rightness doesn't matter because the world doesn't actually care whether you think the choice is meaningful. The world just cares that you make a choice. And if you refuse to make one, it makes one for you. This is the 14th lesson, and it's one that I think about every single time I see political discourse online. Because there are so many people who feel like Stan. People who look at the options available to them and think, I don't want to choose between these two things. I don't want to participate in this broken system. I want to abstain, and I understand that impulse. I really do. But South Park is saying something harder than that. It's saying that abstaining is still a choice. That by refusing to vote, Stan is choosing to let other people's votes determine the outcome. By refusing to participate, he's choosing to let the system continue without his input. And that choice has consequences. The way the episode frames it is brilliant because it doesn't judge Stan for thinking the system is broken. The show agrees with him. The system is broken. But the show is saying that your belief that the system is broken doesn't exempt you from having to make choices within that broken system. You don't get to step outside of reality just because you disagree with how reality works. You have to choose what matters to you, and not always between good and bad, usually between flawed and more flawed, between terrible and somewhat less terrible. And the hardest part is accepting that you have to choose anyway, that you don't get the luxury of abstaining just because none of the options are what you want. I think about this constantly, because I think this is the core of what it means to be an adult. It's not that you get to the point where you understand everything and make decisions based on perfect knowledge. It's that you get to the point where you realize you'll never have perfect knowledge, and you have to make decisions anyway. South Park is saying that you don't get to wait until you're sure. You don't get to say, I'll participate when someone offers me a candidate I actually believe in. You get to choose between the options available. And if you refuse to choose, you're choosing to let someone else decide for you. That's the 14th lesson. And I think it's maybe the most practically useful lesson that South Park ever taught. Because it's not about morality in the abstract. It's about how to actually live in a broken world where you have to make choices with imperfect information, using flawed options, knowing that whatever you choose might be wrong. So let me bring this all together. Let me show you the pattern that I've been dancing around this whole time. Let me show you what the actual through line of South Park has always been. Every single lesson that South Park taught you came wrapped in something offensive. The lesson about childhood trauma and the dangers of predators came wrapped in a musical number and the image of children sexually abusing each other. The lesson about prejudice came wrapped in slurs and stereotypes so vicious that most networks wouldn't touch them. The lesson about free speech came wrapped in the image of Muhammad, a figure that depicting was considered deeply offensive to an entire religion, so offensive that it inspired real-world violence. The lesson about depression came wrapped in the image of a 10-year-old boy covered in shit, seeing the entire world filtered through feces. And I think that's the actual genius. Not that South Park could be shocking. Tons of things can be shocking. You can make anything shocking if you just push far enough. Shock value alone doesn't mean anything. But that Matt and Trey understood something fundamental about how human beings actually learn. They understood that lessons delivered in comfort don't stick with you. That a moral delivered gently is a moral that people forget. That the lessons that change you are the ones that make you uncomfortable. The ones that make you laugh when you feel like you shouldn't be laughing. The ones that make you think about things you didn't want to think about. The ones that make you feel a little bit ashamed of yourself. Think about the structure of the show. Every episode starts with a problem. Then the kids try to solve it in the dumbest way possible. Then everything explodes. And then, at the end, Kyle or Stan or whoever has learned something. That format is so consistent that it becomes ironic. That's the point. The form itself becomes a joke. But what happens over time is that form becomes real. The jokes about learning things become actual learning. The formula becomes genuine. Matt and Trey set out to satirize the very concept of learning something today. And in the process, they ended up creating a show that actually did teach you things. Every single episode, for 25 years. The vulgarity wasn't a bug. It was the delivery mechanism. It was the way that Matt and Trey made sure the lessons would stick with you. Because if you laughed at something crude, you're more likely to remember it. If you felt a little bit ashamed of laughing, you're going to keep thinking about why you laughed. And that thinking, that lingering uncomfortableness, that's where the real learning happens. South Park understood that the most important truths are the ones that make you uncomfortable. That the lessons worth learning are the ones that come wrapped in something you have to be a little bit ashamed of. That the only way to really teach someone something is to make them feel like they shouldn't be learning it. And I think that's what separates South Park from every other show that tried to do social commentary. Because most social commentary is preachy. It tells you what to think. It frames the lesson in a way that's palatable and easy to digest. But South Park doesn't do that. South Park punches you in the stomach and then tells you something true while you're still recovering from the punch. The show didn't lecture, it provoked. And because it provoked, the lessons stuck in a way that lectures never could have. Because you had to process your reaction first. You had to feel guilty about laughing. And only then could you actually think about what the joke was really saying. That's the real thesis of South Park. Not any of the individual lessons, but the understanding that truth is often hidden underneath things that are offensive. That the most important things to say are the things that people don't want to hear. And that sometimes the only way to make people hear something true is to hide it underneath shock and vulgarity and crude humor. Matt and Trey spent 25 years proving this theory. And they did it by making a cartoon that shocked everyone, that offended everyone, that pushed every boundary it could find. But underneath all of that shock, there was actually something real, something true, something that mattered. And do you remember, way at the beginning of all of this, when I told you about Kyle, about how episode after episode, regardless of what happened, regardless of how horrible and crude and chaotic everything had been, Kyle would turn to the camera and say, "You know, I learned something today." How that became such a recognizable formula that everyone made fun of it. How it was so much of a thing that some people thought the show was mocking the concept of learning anything at all. Because the very first episode, Cartman gets an anal probe, which aired on August 13th, 1997. Right there at the beginning, Kyle stands up and delivers that speech for the first time. He's talking to aliens. He's trying to save his brother. And he says, "You know, I learned something today. Having a little brother is a pretty special thing. And it works. It's sincere. It's real." Kyle is genuinely changed by what's happened to him. But then the aliens don't care. The lesson doesn't save him. The truth doesn't matter. And Kyle gets so angry that he starts cursing them out. He's screaming obscenities at these creatures. Because sometimes, even when you learn something true, the world doesn't reward you for it. The world doesn't care that you're right. That's how the pattern started. That's how "I learned something today" became a thing. Kyle would find truth. He would articulate it, and the world would punish him for it, or ignore him, or keep moving forward like the lesson never happened. But here's what I realized, and I want you to carry this with you into your dreams tonight, because I think it might be the most important thing South Park has ever done. That phrase, over the course of 25 years, stopped being ironic. It became real. The joke became truth. The formula that started as a way to satirize the idea of learning anything became a genuine promise that Matt and Trey made to you every single episode. That no matter how dark, how offensive, how crude, how horrible the story is, there's something real in there, something true, something that, if you're paying attention, will stick with you forever. I've spent hours tonight walking you through all of this, through the lessons, through the offensiveness, through the moments that changed your life without you even realizing it was happening, through the show's journey from crude shock comedy to something that actually had something to say. And what I want you to understand is that South Park learned something every day, that the creators of the show were so committed to the idea that every story could teach you something, that they actually ended up teaching themselves things. Every episode, for 25 years, they kept learning, they kept growing. They kept pushing to say something real underneath all the vulgarity and shock. And in doing so, They proved that it's possible, that you can create art that's both wildly offensive and deeply meaningful. And somewhere along the way, they taught all of us. They made us laugh at things that made us uncomfortable. They made us think about things we didn't want to think about. They made us learn things that felt dangerous to learn. They made us grow, episode by episode, year by year, season by season. They taught us about kindness and freedom and the cost of growing up. They taught us that you can choose to be good even when the world punishes you for it, that you have to choose what matters to you, that the lessons worth learning are the ones that make you feel a little bit guilty for laughing. I want to thank you for spending this time with me, for sitting here through all of this, in the late hours of your night or early hours of your morning, however you found time to listen, for letting me walk you through 25 years of a show that somehow managed to be both the crudest thing on television and one of the most thoughtful. That managed to be a joke and a truth at the same time. That managed to offend you and teach you in the same breath. That changed you without you even realizing it was happening. If you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. It helps us keep making these long videos for you, and it means the world that you care enough to sit through them. There's more coming, much more, because South Park is still going. The show is still on. There's always more to learn from this thing. So until next time, get some sleep. Let these lessons settle into you. Let the offensiveness fade and the truth remain. Think about what it means that a cartoon taught you more about the world than most of the people around you ever could. Think about what it means that the crudest show on television was also the most honest. Because you learned something today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.